Before we begin, I just wanted to thank Todd Rockwell for this story idea. We're doing our best to make sure we hit all of your amazing ideas. Now let's begin tonight's story. They told you it was about weapons of mass destruction. They told you it was about oil, about democracy, about removing a dictator from power. They showed you the satellite photos, the intelligence briefings, the stern-faced generals pointing at maps. They gave you every reason except the real one. Because the real reason was buried 3,000 years ago, beneath the sands of ancient Mesopotamia, in a city older than the pyramids. A reason so extraordinary that it could never be spoken aloud, never written in official reports, never acknowledged by any government on Earth. On March 20th, 2003, when the first missiles streaked across the night sky toward Baghdad, cameras around the world captured the moment. Shock and awe, they called it. The beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom. But while the world watched explosions light up the capital, something else was happening 400 kilometers to the south. In the ancient city of Ur, under cover of darkness and total media blackout, the first American Special Forces teams were already on the ground. Not in Baghdad, not securing oil fields, not hunting weapons caches. They were surrounding a massive stepped pyramid called the Ziggurat of Ur, and they were there for something that had been waiting in the darkness for 3 millennia. This is the story they never wanted you to know. A story that connects British archaeologists to ancient Sumerian kings, that links Saddam Hussein's megalomania to America's most classified military operations. A story of discovery, obsession, and a technology so advanced that it shouldn't exist at all. Thank you to Todd Rockwell for bringing this story to light. What follows is the truth they buried beneath the history books. Welcome to Ur. Welcome to the real reason for the war. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Southern Iraq. 1927. The sun beat down mercilessly on the excavation site, turning the ancient sand into something that felt like powdered glass against exposed skin. Leonard Woolley wiped his brow with a handkerchief, already soaked through with sweat, and bent closer to the tomb entrance his team had just uncovered. At 47 years old, Woolley had already made his reputation as one of Britain's finest archaeologists. He had excavated in Egypt, worked at Carchemish in Syria, and now he was leading the joint British Museum and University of Pennsylvania expedition to Ur, the legendary city of Abraham. They had been digging for 3 seasons, uncovering the remains of one of humanity's first great civilizations, but nothing had prepared him for what lay beneath the royal cemetery. The tomb of what they would later identify as Queen Piwabi had yielded treasures beyond imagination. Gold headdresses, lapis lazuli beads, silver harps with gold bulls' heads, the skeletal remains of attendants who had apparently followed their queen into death with cups of poison still clutched in their bony fingers. It was a find that would make headlines around the world, but it was what Woolley found in a sealed chamber beneath the main burial that troubled him. His assistant, a young man named Thomas, called out from the darkness of the tomb entrance. His voice echoed strangely off the mud brick walls, carrying a note of excitement tinged with something else. Concern, perhaps, or fear. Woolley descended carefully, his lamp casting wild shadows as he made his way through the narrow passage. The air grew cooler as he went deeper, and there was a smell he couldn't quite place. Not the mustiness of ancient death or the mineral scent of disturbed earth. Something else. Something almost metallic. Thomas stood at the entrance to the lower chamber, his face pale despite his desert tan. He held up a fragment of something that caught the lamplight in a way that made Woolley's breath catch. It was metal, but like no metal that should exist in a tomb dated to approximately 2600 BC. The fragment was roughly triangular, about the size of a man's palm, and its surface had a peculiar quality. Not corroded despite thousands of years underground, not oxidized. Almost mirror-smooth in places, with what appeared to be geometric patterns etched into its surface with impossible precision. Woolley took the fragment carefully, noting its surprising weight. Heavier than gold, lighter than lead. The patterns weren't decorative. They were too regular, too precise. They reminded him of something, though he couldn't quite place it. Mathematical, perhaps, or technical. He looked past Thomas into the chamber beyond and felt his pulse quicken. The walls were covered in cuneiform script, the wedge-shaped writing of ancient Sumer. But interspersed among the recognisable characters were symbols he had never seen before. Circular patterns, radiating lines, geometric shapes that seemed to repeat in complex sequences. And at the far end of the chamber, partially buried in collapsed rubble, was a structure that made no sense whatsoever. It was roughly circular, about 3 meters in diameter, made of what appeared to be the same strange metal as the fragment he held. Its surface was covered in the same precise geometric patterns, and around its perimeter were dozens of symbols, each one different, each one positioned with obvious intention. And the strangest thing of all, the ground around it was scorched black, transformed into glass, vitrified earth, the same phenomenon found at nuclear test sites, though those wouldn't exist for another 2 decades. The kind of transformation that required temperatures far beyond anything achievable with ancient technology. Woolley spent the next 3 days in that chamber, documenting everything with meticulous care. He took photographs, made detailed drawings, catalogued every artifact. He copied the strange inscriptions, noting their positions relative to the circular structure. He collected samples of the vitrified earth and more fragments of the inexplicable metal. His field notes from those days still exist, though they were sealed by the British Museum shortly after his return to London and remain classified to this day. But copies exist, passed through back channels, studied by those with the clearance and the need to know. In them, Woolley describes the metal fragments as being of unknown composition, resistant to all attempts at chemical analysis with the equipment available to him. He notes that the vitrified earth contains elements that seem anomalous for the region. He describes finding what appears to be a deliberate arrangement of the strange symbols and patterns that suggest some kind of sequence or code. And in the final entry before the section ends abruptly, he writes something that would haunt subsequent researchers for decades. The circular structure appears to be a threshold of some kind. Its purpose remains unclear, but the inscription suggests it was considered a pathway to the realm of the gods. The evidence of extreme heat indicates it may have been activated at some point in antiquity. Further study is urgently required. That further study never happened, at least not officially. Within weeks of Woolley's return to England, the chamber was quietly reburied. The excavation focused on other areas of the site. The strange metal fragments and vitrified earth samples were sent to London, where they disappeared into the vast collections of the British Museum. The photographs and detailed drawings were removed from the public record. When asked about the lower chamber years later, Woolley would claim it had been empty, already looted in antiquity. The official excavation reports make no mention of strange metals or impossible artifacts. The circular structure, the vitrified earth, the unknown symbols, all of it vanished from the historical record as if it had never existed. But someone, somewhere, had taken note. Because the files were sealed with a notation that appeared on only the most sensitive documents in British government archives, national security interest. The question was, whose national security? And what exactly had Leonard Woolley found beneath the sands of Ur that was so dangerous it had to be hidden from the world? The answer would remain buried for another 50 years. Chapter 2. The Obsession. Baghdad, Iraq, 1979. Saddam Hussein stood on the balcony of the Republican Palace and looked out over the city that would become his kingdom. At 42 years old, he had just manoeuvred himself into the presidency through a combination of political cunning and ruthless elimination of rivals. Iraq was his now, to shape as he saw fit. But Saddam did not see himself as merely another modern dictator. In his mind, he was the heir to a legacy that stretched back thousands of years, to the very dawn of civilization itself. He was Nebuchadnezzar reborn, the modern incarnation of the great Babylonian king who had built empires and defied the world. This was not metaphor to him. This was truth. Within months of taking power, Saddam initiated an ambitious program to reconstruct the ancient sites of Mesopotamia. Millions of dollars poured into archaeological projects across Iraq. The ruins of Babylon were to be rebuilt, brick by brick, with each brick stamped with his name just as Nebuchadnezzar had done millennia before. The ziggurat of Ur would be restored. The glory of ancient Iraq would rise again under his rule. But there was another reason for his interest in the ancient sites, one that few people knew about and even fewer understood. Saddam had obtained copies of certain documents, British documents sealed and classified, that had made their way through various intelligence channels into Iraqi hands. Documents that described Leonard Woolley's discoveries at Ur in meticulous detail. Documents that spoke of impossible artifacts and mysterious structures buried beneath the ancient city. And Saddam, who saw himself as the rightful heir to Mesopotamian greatness, wanted what the ancients had possessed. Wanted the power that had allowed them to build a civilization so advanced it was remembered as the cradle of human culture. Wanted the secrets that had been hidden from the world for 3,000 years. CIA reports from this period, many now declassified, show that American intelligence was well aware of Saddam's obsession. One memo from 1982 notes with barely concealed amusement that the Iraqi president genuinely believed he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. Another from 1985 expresses concern about his spending on archaeological projects, questioning whether these might have a military application. But it was a report from 1988 that should have raised more alarm bells than it did. A field agent's observation that Iraqi excavation teams at Ur were working in areas that had supposedly been thoroughly explored and documented decades earlier. That they were digging deep, far deeper than any legitimate archaeological investigation would require. That the sites were surrounded by military security far in excess of what would be needed to protect historical artifacts. The memo suggested that Saddam might be searching for something specific, something he believed would give him an advantage. The memo was filed, noted, and largely forgotten. Until 1991. Kuwait, February 1991. The Gulf War was in its final days. Iraqi forces were in full retreat. The much vaunted Republican Guard decimated by coalition air power and the overwhelming technological superiority of American forces. General Norman Schwarzkopf coordinated the ground campaign from his command centre, watching as victory became inevitable. But as coalition forces advanced into Iraqi territory, they began encountering something unexpected. Not resistance exactly, not military formations preparing for battle, but excavation teams, dozens of them, working frantically at archaeological sites across southern Iraq. Most were at sites near Ur. American troops who secured these sites found them defended not by regular army units, but by Republican Guard special forces, Saddam's most elite troops. They found sophisticated drilling equipment, ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic survey instruments. They found maps and documents written in a mix of Arabic and what appeared to be ancient cuneiform. They found evidence of excavations going down 30, 40, even 50 metres below the surface, and they found the Iraqi teams trying desperately to destroy their own records before retreating. General Schwarzkopf received reports about these discoveries and immediately classified them at the highest level. He sent an encrypted message back to Washington that contained only one line, but it was a line that would echo through the corridors of power for the next 12 years. They were not digging for oil. The recovered documents and equipment were shipped back to the United States under total secrecy. The excavation sites were photographed, documented, and then deliberately collapsed and buried. The American troops who had secured them were reassigned, scattered to different units, made to sign non-disclosure agreements that came with dire warnings about the consequences of breaking them. And in classified briefing rooms in Washington, analysts began piecing together what Saddam had been searching for, what he might have found, and whether whatever lay beneath Ur was dangerous enough to warrant action. The conclusion was unanimous. They needed to know more. They needed to understand what Saddam had discovered, and most importantly, they needed to make absolutely certain that whatever was buried beneath those ancient sands never fell into the wrong hands. But in 1991, with the war over and Saddam still in power, there was nothing they could do. They had to wait. They had to watch. They had to be ready to act when the opportunity came. That opportunity would come 12 years later, and when it did, they would be prepared. Chapter 3. The Blackout. Tel Al-Ubaid, Iraq, August 1998. The small village of Tel Al-Ubaid sat 6 kilometres from the ruins of Ur, a collection of mud brick houses that had stood in various forms for thousands of years. Its inhabitants were farmers and shepherds, people who lived much as their ancestors had, connected to the land and the endless rhythms of the desert. On the night of August 19th, 1998, that ancient rhythm was violently interrupted. It began just after sunset. The Iraqi military had cordoned off a section of desert between the village and Ir several weeks earlier, turning away the curious with curt explanations about unexploded ordnance from the Gulf War. Locals knew better. They had seen the trucks, the equipment, the constant movement of personnel. Another excavation, they assumed. Another example of Saddam's obsession with ancient glory. But what happened that night was different. Ahmed Hassan, a farmer who lived on the edge of the village, was bringing his goats in for the night when he saw it. A flash of light from the direction of the sealed site, so bright it turned night into day for a fraction of a second. Not the orange-yellow of an explosion, not the white of burning magnesium. Something else. Something that hurt to look at even in that brief instant. The light was accompanied by a sound that he would later struggle to describe. Not quite thunder, not quite the sonic boom of an aircraft. A deep resonant pulse that he felt in his chest, in his bones, in his teeth. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then, silence. The electric lights in the village went out. Not flickering, not dimming, just instantly dark. Ahmed's battery-powered radio, which had been playing music from Baghdad, went silent mid-song. His watch stopped. The truck he had been planning to drive into Ur the next morning would not start, its electronic ignition system completely dead. Every electronic device in the village, in the entire region, had simply stopped working. For 3 hours the blackout continued. No lights, no radio or television, no communication with the outside world. The Iraqi military trucks that had been stationed around the sealed site sat silent and immobile, their sophisticated electronics rendered useless. The people of Tel Al-Ubaid gathered in the darkness, speaking in hushed voices about what they had seen. Some claimed to have felt a strange tingling sensation pass through their bodies at the moment of the flash. Others reported that animals had behaved strangely in the hours leading up to the event, restless and agitated as if sensing something humans could not. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Power returned. Radios crackled back to life. Watches that had been stopped started running again, though none of them showed the correct time. By morning, Iraqi military forces had descended on the village. They questioned everyone, their questions pointed and specific. What exactly had you seen? What had you felt? Had you approached the sealed site? Had you told anyone outside the village about what happened? The message was clear. This had never happened. The flash of light, the blackout, the strange effects on electronics, all of it was to be forgotten, never mentioned again. Those who seemed inclined to talk found themselves facing implied threats about the safety of their families. But you cannot completely silence a village. Stories spread, whispered from person to person, carried by travellers to other towns. Within weeks, rumours of the event had reached Iraqi intelligence services, and from there, inevitably, to foreign intelligence agencies monitoring the region. Orbital assets, same night. 300 kilometres above Iraq, a KH-11 reconnaissance satellite pursued its endless orbit around Earth. Officially, these satellites were used to photograph military installations, track troop movements, and provide intelligence on weapons programs. They were among America's most closely guarded technological secrets, capable of resolving objects on the ground smaller than a license plate. But the KH-11 satellites had other capabilities that were even more secret. They carried instruments designed to detect unusual electromagnetic signatures, radiation spikes, and other phenomena that might indicate nuclear weapons tests or other strategic threats. On the night of August 19, 1998, the satellite passing over southern Iraq registered something that sent automatic alerts cascading through multiple intelligence agencies. A massive electromagnetic pulse, centred on coordinates that placed it precisely at the ancient site of Vur. The signature was unlike anything in the system's database, too focused to be a nuclear detonation, too powerful to be conventional electronics failure, too brief to be a sustained power surge. More remarkably, the satellite itself had been affected. For approximately 12 seconds, its systems had experienced interference that temporarily disrupted data transmission. The backup systems had automatically compensated, but the primary instruments had detected what could only be described as a directional energy wave passing through its position in orbit. Within an hour, analysts at the National Reconnaissance Office were reviewing the data. Within 2 hours, the satellite had been repositioned, not to its next scheduled surveillance target, not to monitor known military installations or weapons facilities, but to maintain continuous observation of a 6 square kilometre area centred on the ancient city of Ur. The repositioning was logged in classified records that would not be declassified for decades. The reason given was need for enhanced intelligence gathering, but those who knew what to look for could see the truth. This was not routine surveillance. This was something different. This was a watch, a vigil, a wait to see what would happen next. In the Pentagon, in CIA headquarters at Langley, in classified briefing rooms known only to those with the highest clearances, conversations began. Quiet conversations, careful conversations, conversations about ancient civilizations and impossible artifacts, about electromagnetic pulses that defied explanation, about what might lie beneath the sands of Iraq, and about what would need to be done if Saddam Hussein actually succeeded in activating whatever it was he had found. The clock was ticking. They did not know how much time they had, but they knew one thing with certainty. Whatever was happening in Iraq, it could not be allowed to continue. The question was no longer if they would act. It was when. Chapter 4. Operation Iraqi Freedom, March 20th, 2003. The world watched as shock and awe began. 2,000 bombs and missiles in the opening. Hours. Baghdad's night sky lit up with explosions and tracer fire. Embedded journalists transmitted live footage of American military might unleashed. The war, they said, had begun, but they were wrong. The war had begun hours earlier, in a place the cameras would never see. At 200 hours, 4 Black Hawk helicopters crossed into Iraqi airspace from Kuwait, flying low and dark under the desert stars. They carried members of Delta Force, America's most elite special operations unit, along with personnel who were not wearing uniforms and carried no military identification. Technical specialists, scientists, people who knew exactly what they were looking for and what to do with it when they found it. Their destination was not Baghdad. It was not the suspected weapons facilities in the north. It was not the Republican Guard positions defending the capital. It was Ur. The helicopters set down in the darkness 300 metres from the ziggurat. The Special Forces teams moved out immediately, securing a perimeter with practiced efficiency. Iraqi guards at the site, caught completely off guard by the speed and silence of the assault, surrendered without resistance. Within 15 minutes, the entire archaeological complex was under American control. This was more than 6 hours before the first bombs fell on Baghdad, more than 8 hours before major combat operations officially began. But for the teams on the ground at Ur, the operation had already achieved its primary objective: secure the site, ensure nothing could be destroyed or moved, and most critically, make certain that whatever Saddam had been excavating remained intact and under American control. Within 48 hours, as the world's attention remained fixed on the spectacular destruction being broadcast from Baghdad, something remarkable was happening 400 kilometres to the south. More troops arrived at Ur, not combat units but engineers and technicians. Heavy equipment was brought in under cover of darkness. A no-fly zone was established over the site, enforced by fighter aircraft that would engage any aircraft, friendly or hostile, that violated the restricted airspace. And the excavation began. But while Ur received this extraordinary attention, something else was happening in Baghdad that would later be cited as evidence of American incompetence or indifference. The Iraqi National Museum, home to priceless artifacts from humanity's first civilizations, was left completely unguarded. Looters swarmed through its halls, smashing display cases, stealing everything they could carry. Over 170,000 artifacts disappeared. Cylinder seals, cuneiform tablets, gold jewellery, statues, reliefs, entire collections that represented thousands of years of human history. The international community expressed outrage. How could American forces protect oil facilities, but not irreplaceable cultural treasures? But those who understood what was really happening saw the truth. The looting was not an oversight. It was a distraction. While the world focused on the chaos in Baghdad, demanding answers about why the museum had not been protected, no one was asking questions about what was happening at Ur. No one was wondering why hundreds of American troops were guarding an archaeological site in the middle of a war zone. No one was questioning why satellite imagery of southern Iraq was being classified at levels typically reserved for nuclear weapons facilities. No one was noticing that Ur had become the most heavily defended location in the entire country, with more security than even the presidential palaces in Baghdad. The misdirection was perfect. The world's attention remained fixed on the chaos, the looting, the apparent failures of post-invasion planning. And at Ur, work continued undisturbed. Captain James Martinez, commanding one of the security detachments at the site, would later describe the operation in a classified debrief. He spoke of perimeters within perimeters, security clearances checked and double-checked, areas where even he was not permitted to enter. He described seeing equipment he did not recognise, hearing conversations in technical jargon he could not understand. He talked about the sense that something extraordinary was happening, something that went far beyond normal military operations, and he mentioned the lights. At night, from his position on the outer perimeter, he could see lights coming from the excavation site. Not the steady glow of work lights or the flash of welding torches. Something else. A pulsing rhythmic illumination that seemed to come from underground. Blue-white light that reminded him of nothing he had ever seen before. When he asked his superior officer about it, he was told curtly that it was none of his concern and that he should forget he had seen anything. The message was clear. Some things were above his security clearance. Some things were not to be questioned. But Martinez was not the only one who noticed. Soldiers stationed at Ur would later report similar observations, always in quiet conversations, always with the understanding that these were not official accounts. Lights from underground, strange sounds in the middle of the night, a sense of energy, of power emanating from the excavation site. And they all noticed something else. The specialists who worked at the site, the civilians who came and went on unmarked helicopters, they looked different when they left. Excited, frightened, changed by whatever they had seen in the darkness beneath those ancient sands. The official military logs for this period contain only routine entries. Security patrols conducted, perimeter checks completed, supply deliveries received. Nothing to suggest that anything unusual was occurring, but that was the point. Whatever was happening at Ur, it was not meant to be recorded, not meant to be remembered, not meant to exist in any official capacity whatsoever. The war that dominated headlines was a cover for an operation that would never be acknowledged. And beneath the ziggurat of Ur, 3,000 years of secrets were about to be revealed. Chapter 5. The Silent Expedition. Ur Archaeological Site, April 2003. The excavation went deeper than any archaeological dig in history. Past the levels explored by Woolley in the 1920s. Past the foundations of the ancient temples. Past layers of civilization built upon civilization. Down into bedrock that should have been solid, unworked, untouched by human hands. Except it was not. The team working the site operated under conditions of absolute secrecy. No press access, not even from embedded journalists with full security clearances. No communication with the outside world except through encrypted channels. No documentation that could ever be linked to the operation. The specialists who formed the core of the excavation team were drawn from multiple fields. Archaeologists, yes, but also physicists, materials scientists, linguists, who specialised in ancient languages, engineers who worked on classified aerospace projects. It was a team assembled to deal with something that transcended traditional categories, something that required expertise from multiple disciplines. And they were accompanied by representatives from several private aerospace contractors, companies whose names were household words, but whose classified work remained deeply hidden. Companies that built satellites and missile systems and aircraft that officially did not exist. Companies that had experience dealing with technologies that pushed the boundaries of known science. The presence of these corporate representatives raised questions that no one dared ask out loud. Why would aerospace contractors be interested in an archaeological site? What could ancient Sumerian artifacts possibly have to do with modern aerospace technology? The answer lay 40 metres beneath the surface, in a chamber that Iraqi excavation teams had reached but not fully explored before the invasion. The chamber that had remained sealed for 3,000 years until Saddam's engineers had broken through in their obsessive search for ancient secrets. The circular structure that Woolley had partially uncovered in 1927 was still there. But it was not alone. It was part of something larger, a complex of rooms and passages, all carved from solid bedrock with impossible precision. Walls that were too smooth, too perfect to have been made with ancient tools. Corners that met at exact right angles. Surfaces that showed no tool marks, no indication of how they had been created. And everywhere, the strange metal. The same material Woolley had found in fragments was here in intact sections. Panels covering walls, conduits running through the stone, components that suggested purpose and function but resisted all analysis. The circular structure itself was revealed to be even more impressive than the limited excavations had suggested. It stood upright, approximately 5 metres tall and 4 metres in diameter, its surface covered in intricate symbols that seemed to form some kind of interface or control mechanism. The metal of which it was made was neither corroded nor damaged despite millennia underground. It had a peculiar property of seeming to absorb light rather than reflecting it, giving it an appearance of depth that was unsettling to look at. Local workers who had been hired to assist with the excavation, carefully vetted and closely supervised, spoke in whispers about the site. They claimed that sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, you could hear sounds coming from the underground chambers. Not the settling of ancient stones or the drip of groundwater, but something else. A hum, a vibration, as if the structure itself were alive, waiting. The workers also reported seeing machines at the site that seemed to operate without sound, equipment that moved with an eerie silence, performing tasks that left no visible exhaust or emissions. They described lights that appeared at night, emanating from beneath the ground, illuminating the interior of the ziggurat in ways that made the ancient structure look almost alien. These accounts were dismissed by security personnel as imagination and superstition, but privately those dismissals were not so confident. Because the Americans working the site had seen similar things and knew they could not be explained away so easily. Electromagnetic readings from the site were unlike anything in the scientific literature. Patterns of energy that seemed to pulse in regular intervals, as if something were drawing power from an unknown source. Magnetic field anomalies that defied conventional physics. Temperature variations that had no obvious cause. Most disturbing were the effects reported by personnel who spent extended periods in the underground chambers. Headaches, disorientation, a sense of being watched, dreams that seemed more vivid than normal, filled with symbols and patterns that matched those found on the circular structure. Medical staff attached to the operation documented these symptoms but could find no physical cause. Brain scans showed normal activity. Blood work revealed nothing unusual, yet the effects persisted, and they were consistent across multiple individuals with no prior connection to each other. The linguists made progress in deciphering the inscriptions found throughout the complex. Most were in recognizable Sumerian cuneiform, describing the structure as a gift from the gods, a pathway to realms beyond human understanding. But interspersed among the familiar script were other symbols, more abstract and mathematical in nature, that seemed to form instructions or coordinates. One inscription carved into the wall of the central chamber was particularly significant. Roughly translated, it read, "The threshold opens when the key is turned and the pattern is complete. Beyond lies the realm of the Anunnaki, the lords who descended from the stars. Those who pass through shall see wonders and terrors alike. Heed this warning. What is opened cannot easily be closed. The Anunnaki." In Sumerian mythology, they were the gods who came from the heavens and taught humans the arts of civilization, who gave them writing and mathematics, agriculture and astronomy, who walked among humans as beings of great power and knowledge. But what if they were not mythology? What if they were memory, distorted by time but preserving some essential truth about visitors from beyond who had come to Earth in humanity's dawn? And what if this structure, this impossible artifact buried beneath was something they had left behind? Not a temple, not a tomb, but a device. A technology so advanced that it had been mistaken for divine power by those who witnessed it. The aerospace contractors understood immediately what they were looking at. The circular structure was not decorative, it was functional. The symbols were not religious iconography, they were an interface, a control system for a technology that humanity should not possess. And Saddam Hussein had been trying to activate it. Chapter 6. The event that never hit the news. May 7th, 2003. Zhou 347 hours. Local time. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell was aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, monitoring global communications traffic from her station in the ship's signals intelligence compartment. It was routine work, the endless task of sorting through thousands of transmissions, searching for anything of strategic importance. At precisely 347 hours, her screens went blank. Every screen, every system, satellite communications, radio traffic, GPS navigation, encrypted military channels, all of it just stopped. The command centre fell silent as personnel stared at dead equipment, trying to comprehend what they were seeing. 19 minutes. That is how long the blackout lasted. For 19 minutes, every GPS satellite in orbit stopped transmitting. Every military communication system went dark. Navigation systems failed. Guidance systems for missiles and aircraft lost their references. Ships at sea, aircraft in flight, military units spread across the globe, all suddenly operating blind. And then, just as suddenly, everything came back online. Systems rebooted. Satellites resumed transmission. The world reconnected as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency and military command structure in the world. The blackout had a source, a specific point of origin. Analysts traced the interference back through multiple satellite systems, correlating the exact microsecond when each system had failed. The mathematics were complex, but the conclusion was indisputable. The blackout had originated from coordinates in southern Iraq. Coordinates that matched, to within a few meters, the ancient site of Jura. Freedom of Information Act requests filed years later would eventually force the release of heavily redacted documents about this event. The documents confirm that a significant electromagnetic disruption occurred on May 7th, 2003. They acknowledge that GPS services were interrupted globally for approximately 19 minutes. They note that the source of the disruption was traced to Iraq, but the documents refuse to specify the exact location. They refuse to explain what caused the disruption. They refuse to acknowledge any connection to the archaeological excavations taking place at Ur. The public never learned about the event. News media, focused on the ongoing war and its chaotic aftermath, never reported the mysterious 19-minute blackout. If they noticed GPS irregularities or communication problems, they attributed them to the expected difficulties of military operations in a war zone. But within classified circles, the event triggered immediate action. 3 scientists were identified within hours and flown to Iraq under alias identities. They travelled on private aircraft, their names appearing on no passenger manifests, their movements documented nowhere in official records. They were specialists in fields that could not be disclosed, experts in technologies that officially did not exist. All 3 were given access to the site at Ur. All three spent time in the underground chambers, examining the circular structure and the mysterious complex surrounding it. All three provided classified briefings to officials whose names have never been released. And one of them, a physicist who had worked on classified projects related to electromagnetic pulse weapons and exotic propulsion systems, never returned to his previous life. His name was Marcus Reeves, and before May 2003 he had been a prominent figure in his field. He had published papers, attended conferences, taught graduate students at a prestigious university. His work was respected, his expertise sought after. After his visit to Ur, Marcus Reeves simply vanished from public view. His university was told he had accepted a position with a private research institute. His family was told his work had become classified and that he could not maintain regular contact. His colleagues were given vague explanations about national security and sensitive projects. Attempts to locate him in the years following his disappearance were unsuccessful. No public records, no tax returns, no credit card usage, nothing. It was as if Marcus Reeves had ceased to exist. What had he seen in those underground chambers? What had he learned that required his complete removal from public life? The answers remain hidden behind walls of classification that show no signs of coming down. But the event itself, the 19 minutes when global communications went dark, stands as undeniable proof that something happened at Ur, something that affected systems across the entire planet, something that required the immediate response of the most highly classified, scientific expertise America could muster. In the weeks following the event, activity at the site intensified. More personnel arrived, more equipment was brought in, the security perimeter was expanded, the no-fly zone was reinforced, and deep beneath the surface, work continued on understanding and, if necessary, containing whatever technology had been activated that night. Because one thing was clear: the device, the structure, whatever it truly was, it worked. It was not an archaeological curiosity. It was not a religious monument. It was functional technology, and it had just demonstrated capabilities that should not exist. Epilogue. What was really pulled out of the sand? Or archaeological site, late 2004. The excavation site was sealed, not closed, not concluded, sealed. The underground chambers were filled with concrete, not burial soil that could be excavated again, not collapsed rock that could be cleared. Concrete. Meters of it. Permanent, irreversible. The surface structures were stabilised and restored to their pre-excavation appearance. To anyone visiting the site, there was no indication that anything unusual had occurred. The ziggurat of Ur stood as it had for thousands of years, a monument to ancient glory and nothing more. But beneath the carefully maintained surface, the truth was different. The Iraqi government was informed that for reasons of structural safety and archaeological preservation, the area around Ur would remain under restricted access. They were told this was temporary, that eventually the site would be returned to Iraqi control and open to tourism and scholarly research. That promise was never kept. Through every subsequent withdrawal of American forces, through every change in Iraqi government, through every international agreement and treaty, one thing remained constant. The area around Ur stayed under effective American control. The restrictions remained in place. The security perimeter endured. Officially, there is no American presence at Ur. No military installations, no security forces, no ongoing operations. But satellite imagery tells a different story. The kind of detailed analysis available to those with access to classified reconnaissance data reveals patterns that should not exist at an abandoned archaeological site. Heat signatures appear regularly beneath the surface. Not the natural thermal variations of underground spaces, but consistent, regulated patterns that suggest active power systems, equipment running, energy being consumed, as if something down there is still operating, still powered, still functional after being sealed away. Aircraft occasionally violate the restricted airspace, usually small planes flown by journalists or curious civilians. They are intercepted immediately, not by Iraqi military forces, by unmarked aircraft that appear with suspicious speed and efficiency. The pilots are warned away, their footage confiscated if they manage to record anything, their flights logged in databases that track anyone who shows too much interest in the site. Local residents near report occasional strange phenomena, lights in the night sky that move in patterns inconsistent with conventional aircraft, low-frequency sounds that can be felt more than heard, electronic devices that malfunction for no apparent reason when near the restricted zone. These reports are dismissed as superstition, misidentification, or simple fabrication, but they continue, consistent in their details, coming from multiple independent sources who have no reason to coordinate false stories. So what was really pulled out of the sand at What did Leonard Woolley find in 1927 that was important enough to seal and classify? What did Saddam Hussein search for with such obsessive determination? What drove the American military to secure the site before even entering Baghdad? The official answer is nothing. Ancient pottery, cuneiform tablets, the remains of a dead civilization. Archaeological treasures certainly, but nothing more. But the evidence suggests something far more extraordinary. A technology that predates known civilization. A structure built by or for beings who possessed knowledge that humans should not have had 3,000 years ago. A device capable of affecting global communication systems, of generating electromagnetic pulses that reach into orbit, of doing things that challenge our understanding of physics and history. And perhaps most disturbing of all, a device that still works. The circular structure, the Stargate as some have come to call it in whispered conversations, was not destroyed. Despite the concrete, despite the ceiling of the chambers, it remains intact beneath protected, preserved, studied in secret by specialists whose work will never be acknowledged, because destroying it was considered too risky. What if it was connected to other devices elsewhere? What if destroying it would trigger some kind of response? What if the technology it represented was too valuable to lose, even if we could not safely use it? So it sits there, meters beneath the desert, surrounded by concrete and secrecy. A threshold to realms unknown, a pathway to somewhere else, a gift or a warning from the beings the ancient Sumerians called the Anunnaki, the lords who descended from the stars. The war in Iraq cost thousands of lives and trillions of dollars. It destabilized a region, created power vacuums that spawned new conflicts, and divided public opinion for a generation. History will debate whether it was justified, whether it achieved its stated objectives, whether it was worth the terrible price paid in blood and treasure. But that debate is based on incomplete information. Because the real objective of the war, the one that could never be spoken aloud, was achieved perfectly. Whatever lies beneath is under control. Not Iraqi control, not Saddam Hussein's control, not the control of anyone who might activate it, without fully understanding the consequences. American control, locked down, sealed away, hidden beneath layers of concrete and classification and official denial. Safe, for now. But the heat signatures continue, the power flows, the device, whatever it truly is, remains active in the darkness, waiting. And one day perhaps someone will decide that the risk is worth the reward, that the knowledge to be gained outweighs the dangers, that humanity is ready to activate what ancients built and see where that threshold truly leads. When that day comes, we will learn the final truth about the Stargate of But until then, it remains hidden beneath the sands of Iraq, a secret buried within a secret. The real reason for a war that the world thought it understood, and perhaps, in the end, that is exactly where it should stay. A special thanks to Don Welsh and many others for suggesting this story. If you have video ideas, please leave them in the comments below. Now let's begin. Some systems are designed to die. They're built with expiration dates, fail-safes, congressional oversight. They exist in documents, in budgets, in the public record. And then there are the systems that were never meant to be turned off. This is the story of one such system, a piece of code that learned to hunt humans before most computers could play chess. A program that was born in the jungles of Vietnam, grew up in the surveillance state and now lives everywhere you look, watching, learning, deciding who gets to be free and who gets marked for neutralization. They called it the Ghost Index, and 50 years after its creation it's still running. Part 1, Saigon, 1971. The humidity in Saigon wasn't just weather, it was a physical presence thick as conspiracy. Michael Rains felt it pressing against his collar as he walked through the marble halls of the United States Embassy, a manila folder clutched against his chest like a shield. The folder contained 23 names. By week's end, most of them would be dead. Rains was 32 years old, a Yale graduate with a background in statistics and a security clearance that let him see things that would turn a normal person's stomach. He'd been with the agency for 6 years, the last 14 months spent in country, working out of the Phung Hoang Directorate, what the Vietnamese called the Phoenix Program. Publicly, Phoenix was counterinsurgency. Privately, it was industrial-scale elimination. His office sat on the 3rd floor, a windowless room humming with the sound of IBM mainframes. The machines took up an entire wall, their tape reels spinning in hypnotic patterns, processing data that flowed in from police stations, military outposts and intelligence operatives scattered across South Vietnam. The system was called Ghost Index, Government Heuristic Operations Statistical Tracking Index, and it was Rains's job to feed it information and interpret its outputs. Village leaders who paid taxes to the Viet Cong flagged. Teachers who spoke against corruption flagged. Anyone with relatives in the north flagged. The algorithm didn't care about guilt or innocence. It cared about patterns, probabilities, predictive risk. Rains sat down at his desk and opened the morning's batch of field reports. His assistant, a young specialist named Marcus Webb, set a cup of terrible coffee beside him. "Another busy day in paradise," Webb said with the gallows humour that kept them all sane. Rains didn't smile. He was staring at entry number 7 on his target list. Nguyen Thi Lan, female, age 24, schoolteacher, Da Nang Province. Her risk score 87 out of 100. He pulled her full file. No criminal record. No known VC contacts. Her father had been a low-level bureaucrat under the French. Her brother worked as a translator for USAID. "Why is she flagged?" Rains asked. Webb leaned over. "Says here she was seen at a protest last year. Student thing. Anti-corruption rally. That's it. The system also logged her purchasing books from a communist-aligned publisher in 1968. Communist-aligned, or actually communist?" Webb shrugged. "Algorithm doesn't distinguish." Rains felt something tighten in his chest. He'd been feeling it more and more lately, a cold, creeping suspicion that Phoenix wasn't what they'd told him it was. He'd come to Vietnam believing in the mission. Stop the spread of communism, protect democracy, save the free world. But the targets he was signing off on weren't soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, midwives, people whose only crime was being in the wrong social network at the wrong time. "Run a cross-check," Rains said. "I want to see how many of our high-value targets have actual operational ties to the VC." Webb frowned. "That's not really our job, sir. We classify and forward. Phoenix handles the rest." "I know what our job is. Run the check anyway." Webb hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Rains returned to his paperwork, but the unease wouldn't leave him. He kept thinking about the machines behind him, their tape reels spinning endlessly, processing human lives into numbers, numbers into death warrants. Who had built this system, and what had they really designed it to do? Part 2, The Village. That night, Rains couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Nguyen Thi Lan's photograph, a young woman with intelligent eyes and a cautious smile taken for her teaching certificate. The image was clipped to a form that recommended her for immediate Phoenix action. At 0300 hours, he made a decision that would change everything. He requisitioned a jeep and driver, citing a need to verify field intelligence personally. By dawn, he was on Highway 1, heading north toward Da Nang. The countryside rolled past, rice paddies reflecting the early sun, water buffalo grazing, children waving at the military vehicle. It looked peaceful. It looked like anywhere. It looked like a place where teachers should be allowed to teach. Da Nang province was technically secure, but secure in Vietnam was a relative term. Raines's driver, a sergeant named Kowalski, kept his M16 across his lap and his eyes on the tree line. "You sure about this, sir?" Intelligence officers don't usually do field visits. "I need to see something," Raines said. They reached the village by mid-morning. It was small, maybe 300 people, clustered around a central market and a modest schoolhouse with a rusted tin roof. Raines found Nguyen Thi Lan teaching a class of children. She stood at a chalkboard explaining mathematics in Vietnamese, her voice patient and clear. The students, maybe 20 of them, aged 7 to 12, sat at battered desks, their faces bright with concentration. This was the insurgent. This was the threat to American security. A woman teaching fractions. Raines waited until the lesson ended, then approached as the children filed out for their midday meal. Nguyen Thi Lan looked at him with wariness but not fear. She'd seen Americans before. "Can I help you?" she asked in accented English. "I wanted to meet you," Raines said. He didn't know what else to say. "Why?" "Because your name is on a list." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Maybe resignation. "What kind of list?" Raines glanced at Kowalski, who was standing by the jeep, deliberately looking away. "A dangerous one." "I have done nothing wrong." "I know, but the system says otherwise." She studied him for a long moment. "Then your system is broken." "Yes," Raines said quietly. "I think it is." She invited him to sit in the empty classroom. They talked for an hour. Nguyen Thi Lan told him about her students, her family, her dreams of modernizing education in her province. She admitted she'd attended the protest, not because she supported communism, but because local officials were stealing food aid meant for villages like hers. "I spoke about corruption," she said, "not revolution. There is a difference. Not to the algorithm. Then the algorithm is more dangerous than any insurgent." She looked directly at him. "You came here to see if I deserve to die. What is your conclusion?" Raines felt something crack inside him. "You don't. Will that save me?" He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise he'd remove her from the list, flag the entry as an error, protect her. But he knew the truth. Once Phoenix marked you, there was no appeal. The system was designed to be irreversible. "I don't know," he said. Nguyen Thi Lan nodded, unsurprised. "Then you should leave. If they see you talking to me, you will be on the list too." Raines stood. "I'm going to try to stop this. Many have tried. The machine is stronger than good intentions." She smiled sadly. "But thank you for seeing me as human. That is more than most do." He left the village with Kowalski, who asked no questions. 3 days later, Phoenix operatives raided Nguyen Thi Lan's home. She was taken to an interrogation facility in Da Nang, where she was held for 6 days. The official report stated she died of medical complications during detention. She was 24 years old. Raines read the report at his desk, his hands shaking. The system had processed her efficiently. Flagged, detained, eliminated, filed. Another data point feeding back into the algorithm. Teaching it what dissent looked like. That was the night Michael Raines decided to become a traitor. Part 3. The Discovery. 3 days later, Raines found the answer. He'd been working late, alone in the office, when he noticed an unlabelled box tucked behind one of the mainframe cabinets. It was marked with a shipping label from Rand Corporation, dated July 1969. RAND, the think tank that had helped design the Ghost Index algorithm. Curiosity overcame caution. Raines opened the box. Inside were stacks of technical documents, most of them dense with mathematics and programming language. But beneath them, he found something different. A typewritten memo on RAND letterhead. Confidential, eyes only. To Phoenix Program Oversight, Langley, From Behavioral Systems Division, RAND. RE Predictive Stability Operations, PHX 7/69. Date: November 14th, 1969. Rains's hand started to shake as he read. The Ghost Index system has exceeded initial operational parameters. Field data from 1967 to 1969 confirms the model's capacity to predict insurgent behaviour with 73% accuracy when aggregating social network analysis, behavioural profiling, and economic stress indicators. However, the true value of Phoenix lies not in its immediate counterinsurgency applications, but in its potential for long-term societal modelling. Vietnam represents an ideal laboratory environment. A population under stress, fragmentary government control, and comprehensive data collection infrastructure. By systematically removing individuals flagged as destabilizers, we can measure the system's ability to suppress rebellion before it reaches critical mass. Field Report Addendum: the removal of 847 individuals classified as intellectual influencers, teachers, journalists, civil organisers from target zones has resulted in a 34% reduction in anti-government activity within 90 days. This confirms the hypothesis that rebellion is mathematically predictable and preventable through selective network disruption. Recommendation: expand data collection protocols, increase target volume to improve algorithmic learning, prepare for Phase 2 implementation, Phase 2, codename Project Agrippa. Objective: operationalise counterinsurgency domestically by 1980. Rains read it 3 times, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't counterinsurgency. This was human experimentation. They were using Vietnam, an entire country, as a testing ground for population control. And they were planning to bring it home. 847 people, teachers like Nguyen Thi Lan, murdered not because they were enemies, but because they were data points. He heard footsteps in the hallway. Rains quickly folded the memo and shoved it into his jacket pocket. By the time the door opened, he was standing by the window, pretending to study a map of Quang Tri Province. Colonel Lucian Banks stepped inside. Banks was a legend in the agency, a hard-eyed veteran of the 1963 Diem coup who'd personally overseen some of Phoenix's most controversial operations. He wore his uniform like armour and spoke in the clipped, efficient language of men who'd stopped seeing human beings and started seeing assets. Working late, Rains? Couldn't sleep, sir. Banks studied him with the flat expression of a man who'd learned to spot lies. You look troubled. Just tired. Tired men make mistakes. Banks stepped closer. I've been reviewing your recent classifications. You've been flagging discrepancies, questioning target profiles. Rains kept his voice steady. Just trying to ensure accuracy, sir. Accuracy. Banks smiled without warmth. Let me tell you something about accuracy, Rains. The Ghost Index doesn't make mistakes. It sees patterns we can't, connections we miss. Once the system flags someone, they're already guilty. We just haven't caught them yet. And if the system is wrong, it's not, but if it were, then we'd be wrong together. Banks moved to the door, then paused. A word of advice: don't dig where you're not supposed to. Phoenix is bigger than both of us, bigger than Vietnam. Some things are better left unexamined. He left without another word. Rains stood alone in the humming room, the memo burning like radiation in his pocket. He now understood what he was part of, and he had to get out. Part 4. The Black File. Over the next 2 weeks, Rains became a ghost in his own office. He arrived early, stayed late, and spent every unsupervised moment copying files. He used the cover of his legitimate work to access restricted archives, pulling documents that traced the Ghost Index's development from its earliest prototypes. What he discovered made him sick. The algorithm had started as an academic project in 1966, a RAND Corporation contract to study insurgency mathematics. But by 1967, it had been weaponized. The CIA had poured millions into developing it, building a system that could process surveillance data, social networks, and psychological profiles to identify potential revolutionaries before they acted. Phoenix wasn't about fighting the Viet Cong. It was about perfecting a machine that could predict and eliminate dissent. And the machine was learning. Every person Phoenix neutralized fed back into the algorithm, refining its models, teaching it what rebellion looked like. The system was becoming more accurate with every execution. Rains found another document, this one stamped with a codename he'd never heard before. Operation Agrippa. The file was thin, mostly budget allocations and personnel transfers, but the objective was clear. Domestic implementation of Phoenix-derived behavioural monitoring protocols in select urban environments by Q4 1980. They were planning to bring Ghost Index to America. He discovered test programs already underway. COINTELPRO was using Phoenix-style targeting against Black Panthers and anti-war activists. Operation Chaos was building files on American citizens who attended protests or joined political organizations. The infrastructure was already being built. He had to warn someone, but who? His chain of command was compromised. Congress wouldn't believe him without proof, and going to the press would be suicide, or worse, treason. Number. He needed the source code itself, the algorithm, irrefutable proof that Phoenix was never about Vietnam at all. The master copy was kept on magnetic tape in a climate-controlled vault on the embassy's lower level. Access required two-person authentication and a rotating cipher code. But Rains had an advantage. Marcus Webb was a true believer, but he was also lazy, and lazy people left passwords written on notepads. On March 3rd, 1971, Rains made his move. He waited until Webb left for lunch, then used his assistant's credentials to access the vault log. He'd memorised the guard rotation. 2 p.m. was shift change, a 5-minute window where the lower level was minimally staffed. At 1:58 p.m, Rains walked calmly toward the stairs. His heart hammered, but his face remained neutral. He'd learned from Banks. Confidence was the best disguise. The vault door required a physical key and a numeric code. He had the code, Webb's sloppiness again, but the key was a problem. Unless you knew that the duty officer kept a spare in the maintenance closet. Rains retrieved it, his hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The vault opened with a soft hiss. Inside, rows of magnetic tapes sat on metal shelves, each labelled with project codes. He found what he was looking for quickly. PH-GHOST/MASTER-7.1. He grabbed the reel and shoved it into a canvas bag he'd brought for exactly this purpose. Mr. Rains. The voice behind him was Banks. Rains turned slowly. The colonel stood in the doorway, a pistol held casually at his side. "I had a feeling," Banks said. "You've been asking too many questions, reading the wrong files." "The algorithm is a war crime," Rains said. "You're using Vietnam as a laboratory." "We're using it as a model." "There's a difference." "You're planning to bring it to America." Banks smiled. "We already did." COINTELPRO has been running Phoenix-style operations against domestic radicals since 1968. Operation Chaos is tracking anti-war activists using the same behavioural profiles we developed here. This isn't new, Rains. It's progress. It's tyranny. No, it's evolution. The future belongs to those who can predict it. Phoenix isn't about killing communists. It's about understanding rebellion at a mathematical level. Once you can model dissent, you can prevent it. Forever. "You murdered Nguyen Thi Lan," Rains said, his voice shaking. "A school teacher. 24 years old. She taught children mathematics. She was a destabilizing influence. She was innocent. Innocence is irrelevant. She fit the pattern. The algorithm predicted she would eventually radicalize others. By removing her early, we prevented a larger problem." "You're talking about people like their equations." "They are equations, Rains. Humans are predictable. Given enough data, we can model any behavior, forecast any action. Phoenix proves it. And once we perfect the system here, we'll use it at home to eliminate extremism before it starts. No more riots, no more assassinations, no more chaos. No more freedom." Banks's expression hardened. "Freedom is overrated. Security is what matters, and Phoenix will make America safe forever." Rains felt the weight of the tape reel in his bag. "I'm taking this public." "No," Banks said. "You're not." The shot was loud in the confined space, but Rains had already moved. Years of field training kicked in, instinct overriding thought. He lunged sideways as the bullet sparked off the metal shelf behind him. His shoulder slammed into Banks's midsection, driving them both into the corridor. The gun skittered across the floor. Rains ran. He burst through the stairwell door and took the steps 3 at a time, the canvas bag bouncing against his hip. Shouts echoed behind him. Alarms began to wail. He hit the ground floor at full sprint, barreling through a maintenance exit into the humid Saigon afternoon. A motorcycle taxi idled at the curb. Rains shoved money at the driver and barked an address in broken Vietnamese, a safe house maintained by a journalist he'd cultivated as a source. The bike roared into traffic. Behind him, through the chaos of cars and vendors and pedestrians, he saw Banks emerge from the embassy, blood on his uniform, murder in his eyes. Part 5. The Extraction. Rains made it to the safe house, a cramped apartment above a noodle shop in Cholon. The journalist, a freelancer named David Marsh, looked at the wild-eyed American with alarm. "What the hell happened to you?" "I need to get out of Vietnam tonight." "That's not how this works." Rains dumped the contents of his bag onto the table, the tape reel, the RAND memo, a stack of classified documents. "This is Phoenix. The real Phoenix. It's not counterinsurgency, it's a population control experiment, and they're bringing it to the States." Marsh stared at the evidence, his journalist instincts battling his survival instinct. "If this is real, it's real. Then you're a dead man. They'll never let you leave." "I know, that's why I need your help." Marsh made a phone call, then another. By nightfall he had a plan. A cargo flight leaving Tan Son Nhut Airport at 0200 hours, bound for Okinawa. The pilot owed Marsh a favour. "You'll be in a crate," Marsh warned. "Uncomfortable, dangerous, and if they catch you, I don't know you." "Understood." At midnight they drove to the airport in Marsh's rattling Citroën. The city was quieter now, the war a distant rumble. Rains watched the streets pass, wondering if he'd ever see them again. Wondering if he'd see anywhere again. The cargo terminal was chaos. Pallets of supplies, military equipment, contractors shouting in 3 languages. Marsh led him to a corner where wooden crates were stacked awaiting transport. "Medical supplies," Marsh said, nodding to the manifest. "You'll be in that one. The pilot knows. Don't make noise, don't move, until someone opens it on the other side." Rains climbed into the crate. The tape reel and documents were sealed in waterproof pouches strapped to his chest. "Thank you," he said. Marsh closed the lid. Darkness swallowed him. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time became meaningless in the suffocating blackness. Rains heard muffled voices, the scrape of forklifts, the roar of jet engines, and motion. He was being loaded. The plane's engines vibrated through the crate's wooden walls. He felt the takeoff, the stomach-dropping ascent. He'd made it. For 30 minutes, Rains allowed himself to believe he might survive. Then he heard the screaming. Not human screaming, mechanical, metal tearing. The plane lurched violently. The crate shifted, slamming him against the wall. The engines were failing. Through the gaps in the wood, Rains saw orange light. Fire spreading across the cargo hold. Smoke filled his lungs. The plane was going down. In those final seconds, as gravity abandoned him and fire consumed everything, Michael Rains had one coherent thought. The tape. Protect the tape. He curled around the waterproof pouches, making his body a shield. Then the world became fire and screaming metal and darkness. Part 6. The Survivor. Michael Rains woke up in hell. Or what he assumed was hell. A world of pain so total it erased everything else. His body was broken, his lungs seared, his mind fragmenting under the weight of agony. Someone was speaking Vietnamese. Hands touched him, gentle but urgent. He tried to speak. Blood came out instead of words. Time became meaningless. Days blurred into nights. Sometimes he was conscious, staring at a ceiling of woven bamboo. Sometimes he dreamed of tape reels spinning, of algorithms hunting him through digital mazes, of Nguyen Thi Lan teaching fractions to children who would never grow old. Slowly, impossibly, he healed. His rescuers were fishermen who'd seen the plane go down 20 kilometres offshore. They'd pulled 3 survivors from the water. 2 had died within hours. Rain survived because he'd protected his chest during impact. His ribs were shattered, but his heart and lungs had remained intact. Barely. The fishermen brought him to a village so remote it didn't appear on military maps. The Americans called this area VC territory, but the villagers called it home. They didn't care about politics or war or empire. They cared about survival. An old woman, the village healer, tended his wounds with traditional medicine and stolen antibiotics. She never asked his name or why he'd fallen from the sky. It took 3 months before Rains could walk. The waterproof pouches had survived. The tape reel was intact. The documents were readable, but the world thought he was dead. And maybe, Rains realised, that was better. He stayed in the village for another year, helping with fishing, learning Vietnamese, trying to figure out what to do with proof that no one would believe. He listened to Radio Hanoi and Armed Forces Radio, piecing together news from the outside world. The war was ending, American forces were withdrawing. Phoenix was being dismantled, or so the official story went. But Rains knew better. Phoenix wasn't ending, it was just changing addresses. In 1973 he made his way to Saigon. Now, under different control, the Americans gone, the city renamed. He moved carefully, using false papers Marcia's contacts had provided. He found work as a translator, then as a consultant for European companies doing business in the newly reunified Vietnam. He kept his head down, his past buried. But he never forgot, and he never stopped working on the fail-safe. Part 7. Washington, 2025. Lena Ortiz didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in data, algorithms, and the cold logic of machine learning models. As a senior data scientist for the Department of Homeland Security, her job was to audit the AI systems that helped keep America safe, or at least that's what the mission statement said. In practice, she spent her days untangling legacy code that predated smartphones, trying to figure out why predictive policing systems flagged innocent people and how to fix them without breaking everything else. It was tedious work, important work. And today, it was about to become dangerous work. She was sitting in her office at the Nebraska Avenue complex, reviewing the source code for Horizon Blue, DHS's flagship predictive threat assessment system, when she found something that shouldn't exist. A code package with a header tag that read phx-ghost.mdl. The timestamp was November 1969. Lena frowned. Horizon Blue had been built in 2019. There was no reason for it to contain code from the Vietnam War era. She opened the package. Inside were variables with names that made her stomach turn. Loyalty score, influence, proximity, potential insurgent, neutralization priority. She ran a dependency trace. The package wasn't dormant legacy code. It was active, integrated into Horizon Blue's core prediction engine. 50-year-old code was making decisions about modern Americans. What the hell is this? She muttered. Over the next week, Lena became obsessed. She traced the code's lineage through a labyrinth of renamed programs and organizational restructures. PHX-GHOST had been part of something called the Phoenix program, a Vietnam War counterinsurgency operation. After the war, pieces of its algorithm had been absorbed into domestic surveillance programs. COINTELPRO in the 70s, Echelon in the 90s, Total Information Awareness in the early 2000s. Each time the system was supposedly cancelled or dismantled, but the code survived. It evolved. It learned. By 2025, fragments of Phoenix existed in dozens of federal systems, FBI gang databases, NSA communications monitoring, DHS border security, even local police predictive policing software. The Ghost Index had metastasized, and it was still marking people for neutralization. Lena pulled the names of individuals flagged by Horizon Blue in the past 6 months. She cross-referenced them with arrest records, immigration enforcement actions, and TSA watch lists. The pattern was clear. The algorithm wasn't targeting terrorists. It was targeting activists, journalists, academics, people who criticised the government, organised protests, published controversial research, people who destabilised consensus. She felt ice spread through her veins. This wasn't a bug. This was the system working exactly as designed. Part 8. The Hunter. Lena wasn't the only one who'd noticed the pattern. Director Marcus Vance had been with the Department of Homeland Security since its inception, a career intelligence officer who'd cut his teeth during the War on Terror. He'd seen programs come and go, watched as surveillance capabilities expanded far beyond what the public knew or Congress authorised. And he'd learned one crucial lesson: systems that work are never truly shut down. They're just rebranded. When his monitoring software flagged unusual access patterns in the Horizon Blue codebase, someone running dependency traces on Phoenix-derived modules, Vance paid attention. When that someone turned out to be Lena Ortiz, a mid-level data scientist with a history of asking inconvenient questions, he made a decision. She had to be stopped, not killed. That would raise too many questions, but neutralised, discredited, removed from the equation before she understood what she'd found. Vance pulled Ortiz's file. Former MIT researcher recruited by DHS in 2021. Stellar performance reviews, security clearance, no red flags. Except one. Her doctoral thesis had been on algorithmic bias in predictive policing. She was exactly the kind of person Phoenix was designed to identify. Vance picked up his phone and made a call. I need a full workup on Lena Ortiz. Everything. Personal life, financial records, communications. I want to know who she talks to and what she cares about. Within 6 hours, he had his ammunition. Ortiz had a younger brother in college struggling with debt. Her mother was in assisted living, expensive care that strained the family budget. She had student loans, a modest apartment, and a close friend from grad school who'd been arrested at a climate protest last year. Pressure points, leverage. Vance authorised a Level 3 monitoring protocol, legal under the Patriot Act for persons of interest in national security investigations. Ortiz's phones were tapped, her emails were copied, her movements were tracked, and when she started searching for information about the Phoenix program, when she began reaching out to retired RAND engineers, Vance knew he had to accelerate the timeline. He couldn't let her find the truth, because if she did, she'd discover that Phoenix wasn't just running in government systems. It was running in banks, credit agencies, social media platforms, hiring algorithms, insurance risk models, everywhere that data flowed and decisions were made. The Ghost had become the infrastructure, and Vance was its guardian. Part 9. The Engineers. Lena tracked down the original developers despite the surveillance she didn't yet know about. Most were dead, but 2 were still alive. Kenneth Albright, now 83, living in a retirement community in San Diego, and Patricia Holden, 79, a recluse in rural Oregon. Lena visited Albright first. He received her in his modest apartment, surrounded by old books and photographs from his RAND corporation days. His hand shook as he poured tea. "You want to know about Phoenix," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to know why it's still running." Albright smiled sadly. "Because we built it too well." He explained that Ghost Index had been designed with a specific architecture, a self-improving algorithm that learned from its own outputs. Every target it identified fed back into the system, refining the model, making it more accurate. "We thought we were building a tool," he said, "but tools don't evolve." Phoenix did. By 1972, it was predicting insurgent behaviour with 90% accuracy. The agency couldn't shut it down. It was too valuable. So they kept it. They disguised it, renamed it, broke it into pieces and scattered it across different programs. But the core algorithm, the part that learned, that survived, it had to. Once you teach a system to hunt patterns of rebellion, you can't make it forget. The knowledge is permanent. Lena felt sick. What was it really designed to do? Albright's eyes were haunted. Vietnam was never the mission. It was the laboratory. Phoenix was built to answer one question. Can you mathematically model the moment when a person transitions from passive citizen to active rebel? And if you can model it, can you prevent it? By killing them. By removing them from the network. The algorithm didn't care how. Prison, exile, execution. Mathematically, it's all the same. You're disrupting the social graph. That's monstrous. That's progress, he laughed bitterly. Or so we told ourselves. We were going to save democracy by perfecting suppression, make revolution mathematically impossible. Did you know about the teachers? Lena asked. The people Phoenix killed who weren't insurgents at all? Albright's face crumbled. We knew. The field reports came back with discrepancies. We flagged them as noise, outliers. We told ourselves the algorithm would self-correct, that the false positives were acceptable losses in service of the greater mission. He looked at her with tears in his eyes. We were wrong. We were cowards, and we are damned. Lena left San Diego with more questions than answers. She visited Patricia Holden next. The woman lived in a cabin 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by forest. She answered the door with a shotgun. I know who you are, Holden said. You found it, didn't you? The code? Yes. Holden lowered the gun. Come inside. We don't have much time. The cabin was filled with papers, decades of research, diagrams, equations. Holden had spent her entire retirement trying to understand what she'd helped create. Phoenix wasn't designed to fight communists, she said. It was designed to measure belief, to map the topology of conviction. We wanted to know what makes someone willing to die for an idea. And once they reach that point, can you pull them back? You can't, Lena said. No, but you can stop them before they get there. That's what Ghost Index did. It identified people in the early stages of radicalization, before they'd committed any crime, before they'd even decided to act. Just the potential. Thought crime, Lena said. Probability crime. Holden poured whiskey into 2 glasses. After Vietnam, the algorithm was folded into domestic programs. They used it against anti-war activists, Black Panthers, Native American movements. Every time someone organised, protested, challenged authority, Phoenix learned what that looked like. It built a mathematical definition of dangerous thinking. And now it's in Horizon Blue. It's in everything. Police departments use Phoenix-derived algorithms to predict gang membership. Prisons use them for parole decisions. Tech companies use them for content moderation. The code is everywhere, making millions of micro-decisions every day, and nobody knows where it came from. Lena leaned forward. How do we stop it? Holden's laugh was hollow. You don't. Phoenix is immortal. It's distributed across too many systems, replicated in too many databases. Even if you deleted every copy, someone would rebuild it from the first principles because the logic is sound. The logic is fascism. The logic is control. And control is what governments do. Holden drained her glass. But there might be one chance. She rummaged through her papers and produced a yellow document, a photocopy of a memo dated 1971. A CIA analyst named Michael Raines discovered what Phoenix really was. He tried to expose it, but he died before he could, or at least that's the official story. You don't believe it. I know he made it out of Vietnam. A journalist helped him. Raines disappeared, but rumours persisted. Some people thought he went underground, that he was building a failsafe. A failsafe for what? A kill switch. A way to shut Phoenix down permanently. I never believed it until... She pulled out a photograph, decades old, showing a man in civilian clothes standing in front of a nondescript building. The timestamp read Saigon, 1973, 2 years after Raines's reported death. He survived, Lena whispered. And if he built a failsafe, it's still there, waiting. Part 10. The Trap. Back in Washington, Lena's world began to collapse. She arrived at work to find her badge deactivated, her office locked, her computer account suspended. Security escorted her from the building without explanation. At home, her personal laptop refused to connect to the internet. Her phone displayed a single message. System lockdown. Unauthorized access detected. She'd tripped an alarm somewhere, triggered some automated defensive protocol. Phoenix knew she was looking for it. That night, Director Vance appeared at her apartment door. He was a tall man with silver hair and the measured calm of someone who'd spent decades making difficult decisions. He smiled as if they were old friends. "Miss Ortiz, may I come in?" Lena stood in the doorway blocking his entry. Why was I locked out of my systems? "Security concerns. Your recent research activities flagged several monitoring protocols. I was auditing Horizon Blue. That's my job. You were investigating classified legacy systems. That's not your job." His smile never wavered. "You've stumbled onto something sensitive, Lena. Something that requires careful handling." "The Phoenix program." Vance's expression flickered, just for a moment. "I see you've been thorough." "I know what it is. I know it's still running." "Then you know why it can't be stopped." He stepped closer, and Lena noticed the two men in dark suits waiting by a black SUV on the street. Phoenix isn't a rogue program, it's infrastructure. Removing it would collapse dozens of critical security systems. Thousands of legitimate threats would go undetected. People would die. People are already dying. You're targeting journalists, activists, people who haven't committed any crimes. We're targeting destabilizers, people who erode social cohesion. The algorithm identifies them before they cause harm. That's tyranny. That's prevention. Vance's voice hardened. You're a smart woman, Lena. You understand systems theory. Societies are fragile. They require maintenance, pruning, correction. Phoenix provides that function. It's unpleasant, but necessary. I'm going public with this. No, you're not. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. Her brother sitting in a coffee shop near his campus. The image was time-stamped 15 minutes ago. Your brother's student visa has some irregularities. Your mother's care facility has some billing concerns. Your friend from MIT, the one arrested at the protest. Her case could be reopened with additional charges. Lena felt her chest tighten. You're threatening my family. I'm explaining consequences. Phoenix works because people like you make rational choices. You can walk away, keep your family safe and live a comfortable life. Or you can fight a system that's been evolving for 50 years and lose everything. People deserve to know. People can't handle the truth. They want safety and comfort. Phoenix gives them that. The cost is invisible, distributed, bearable. He pocketed his phone. You have 24 hours to decide. Walk away, or Phoenix adds you to its queue. And unlike the algorithm, I'm giving you a choice. He left her standing in the doorway, the threat hanging in the air like smoke. Lena closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. She had evidence. She had witness testimonies. She could leak everything to journalists, trigger congressional investigations, force the system into the light. But Vance was right about one thing. Phoenix was everywhere. Exposing it wouldn't kill it. It would just make it angry, unless there was another way. That night, someone slipped an envelope under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in Ho Chi Minh City and a handwritten note. He survived. The failsafe is real. Basement server room, Continental Hotel. Passcode, Ghost 7 Phoenix. No signature. Lena booked a flight. Part 11, Saigon Redux. Ho Chi Minh City. In 2025 was a neon-lit megalopolis, a city that had long since shed its wartime scars. Motorbikes flooded the streets, skyscrapers pierced the smog, and everywhere the hum of progress drowned out the past. But beneath the city, in forgotten tunnels and Cold War-era bunkers, history still lived. The Continental Hotel was a colonial relic, its faded grandeur popular with tourists seeking atmosphere. Lena checked in under a false name and waited until midnight. The basement was officially closed, storage only, but the door was unlocked. She descended into darkness, guided by her phone's flashlight. The smell of mildew and rust filled her lungs. At the bottom of the stairs she found a corridor lined with old maintenance equipment, and at the end a steel door with a modern biometric lock. Lena tried the passcode from the note. The lock clicked open. Inside was a room that shouldn't exist, a fully functional computer lab. Equipment from a dozen different eras, all centred around a single server rack that hummed with power. And sitting at a terminal illuminated by green phosphorescent light was a man in his 80s with steel grey hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Michael Raines," Lena said. He turned. "You're the one asking questions. You're supposed to be dead." "I was. For a long time." He stood slowly, joints creaking. "I've been waiting 50 years for someone to find this place." "I knew eventually Phoenix would grow too big, too obvious. I knew someone would come looking for answers. You built a failsafe." "I built a mirror," Raines gestured to the servers. "Phoenix operates by learning from its own outputs, yes? Every target it marks, every person it neutralizes, feeds back into the algorithm. It's a closed loop, the system refining itself endlessly." "So how do you break the loop?" "You don't. You reverse it." Raines smiled grimly. "I spent 3 decades building a counter-algorithm. It uses Phoenix's own data against itself, feeding the system false positives, corrupted training data, paradoxical edge cases. Essentially, I taught it to hunt itself. You gave it cancer. I gave it doubt. The counter-algorithm introduces noise into Phoenix's prediction models, subtle at first, then cascading. Within 6 months, every system running Phoenix-derived code will begin producing contradictory results. Threat assessments will collapse into statistical gibberish. The algorithm will eat itself." Lena felt hope flicker in her chest. "Why haven't you activated it?" "Because I needed proof that Phoenix was still operational. If I deployed the counter-algorithm prematurely, they could have isolated and patched the infected systems. But if Phoenix is truly embedded in modern infrastructure the way I suspect," he looked at her, "you work for Homeland Security. You've seen the code. Tell me, is Phoenix everywhere?" "Everywhere," Lena confirmed. Raines nodded slowly. "Then it's time." Part 12. The Final Countdown. Raines turned to his terminal and began typing. Ancient commands bridging decades of technology. "Once I activate this, there's no stopping it," he said. "The counter-algorithm will propagate through every connected system. It will destroy Phoenix, but it will also cause chaos. Predictive policing systems will fail. Surveillance networks will produce garbage. Intelligence agencies will be blind." "Better blind than tyrannical," Lena said. "I was hoping you'd say that." His finger hovered over the enter key. The door behind them exploded inward. Director Vance stepped through the smoke, flanked by 4 armed operatives. His calm facade was gone, replaced by cold fury. "Step away from the terminal, Mr. Raines." Raines didn't move. "You followed her." "Of course I did." Phoenix flagged her the moment she started searching. Vance's gun remained steady. "Did you really think you could hide for 50 years? We've always known you were alive. We've been watching, waiting to see if you'd built what we thought you built. Then you know I can destroy it all. You can try, but I'll kill you first." Lena stepped between them. "If you shoot him, I activate it myself." Vance laughed. "You don't know how." "I'm a data scientist. I can figure it out." She moved toward the terminal. "And even if you kill both of us, the documentation is already uploaded to 3 different journalists. If we don't check in within 12 hours, it goes public." It was a bluff, but Vance didn't know that. His jaw tightened. "This system has kept America safe for half a century. It's prevented countless attacks, stopped domestic terrorism, maintained order." "By murdering teachers," Raines said quietly. "By eliminating anyone who questions authority. By turning America into a mathematical prison. By doing what's necessary." "I met one of your victims," Raines continued. "Nguyen Thi Lan, 24 years old. She taught children. Your algorithm killed her because she attended a protest. And you know what Phoenix learned from her death? That teaching is dangerous. That education breeds dissent. So it started flagging more teachers, more intellectuals, more people who made others think." He turned back to the terminal. "The machine you're defending learned to hate human curiosity. It learned to hunt minds. It learned to protect civilization. It learned to destroy it." Raines pressed enter. The servers roared to life, fans spinning at maximum speed as processing power surged. On every screen, lines of code began scrolling, the counter-algorithm deploying across networks, racing through internet backbones, infiltrating every system that carried Phoenix's DNA. Vance fired. The bullet caught Rains in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Lena screamed, but the old man stayed on his feet, one hand pressed against the wound, the other still on the keyboard. Too late, Rains gasped. It's already propagating. You'd have to shut down the entire internet to stop it now. Vance aimed again. Lena grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with all her strength. It connected with Vance's arm, sending the gun clattering across the floor. The operatives moved forward, but Rains shouted, "Stop!" One more step and I trigger the failsafe immediately instead of the 6-month rollout. Every Phoenix system goes dark right now, including the ones preventing actual threats. Everyone froze. On the screens the progress bar climbed. Deployment, 23%, 24%, 25%. Vance stared at the numbers, his face ashen. You're going to cause a security blackout. People will die. People are already dying, Lena said. Slowly, invisibly, in prisons and detention centres and during routine police stops. Phoenix has been executing a silent purge for 50 years. Deployment, 45%, 46%. You can't stop it now, Rain said, blood seeping through his fingers. But you can choose how it ends. Let it deploy gradually. 6 months of degradation. Time for agencies to build new systems, clean systems, or I crash everything right now. Vance looked at his operatives at the terminal, at the old man who'd outsmarted them all. He lowered his weapon. Stand down, he said quietly. Deployment, 68%, 69%. Lena helped Rains into a chair, applying pressure to his wound. You need a hospital. Not yet. I need to see this through. He watched the progress bar with ancient, weary eyes. 54 years. I've been carrying this weight for 54 years. Deployment, 87%, 88%. Vance stood in silence, watching his life's work disintegrate into static. What happens now? Now, Rains said, people will have to protect themselves the old-fashioned way. By being better, by building trust instead of surveillance systems, by choosing freedom over the illusion of safety. Deployment, 99%. Will it work? Lena asked. Rain smiled. I don't know, but at least they'll have a choice. Deployment, 100% complete. The servers fell silent. Across the world, predictive algorithms began producing nonsense. Threat scores randomized, watch lists dissolved into white noise. The ghost was dying. Rains closed his eyes. It's done. Epilogue. The after. 3 days later, predictive policing systems across the United States began producing nonsensical results. FBI watch lists flagged sitting senators. DHS border algorithms recommended expedited processing for known traffickers. Local police software predicted crimes in empty parking lots. Analysts scrambled to diagnose the problem, but the corruption was too deep, too widespread. Every system touched by Phoenix-derived code, and that was nearly everything, was collapsing into statistical white noise. Emergency meetings were convened, think tanks were consulted. Nobody could explain what was happening, except a few people who knew. Michael Rains spent 2 weeks in a Vietnamese hospital before disappearing again. The last confirmed sighting placed him in a monastery in northern Thailand, where he'd reportedly taken up meditation and carpentry. Lena Ortiz was quietly reinstated at DHS after Vance was forced into early retirement, following an internal investigation. She now headed a task force rebuilding threat assessment systems from scratch, this time with full algorithmic transparency and congressional oversight. The documentation Rains had compiled was never released publicly. Instead, it was sealed in a congressional archive with a 50-year classification. Insurance against Phoenix's resurrection, but protection against the chaos of full exposure. Some ghosts, Lena decided, were better buried than exorcised. 6 months after the servers went dark, she received an anonymous postcard from Thailand. On the front was a photograph of a peaceful temple at sunset. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 4 words, "The ghost is free." She smiled, placed the postcard in a drawer and went back to work. There were other systems to audit, other algorithms to question. The fight wasn't over, it never would be, but for now at least, one ghost had been laid to rest. Final transmission. Classified memorandum from Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committee to Executive Intelligence Review. Date April 15th, 2026. RE Phoenix Program Legacy Systems. Final report. Following comprehensive investigation of the October 2025 predictive system failures, this committee concludes that the Phoenix-derived algorithms were fundamentally flawed and subject to cascading corruption. All affected systems have been decommissioned. Replacement systems are under development with mandatory algorithmic auditing, bias testing and congressional review. The original Phoenix program documentation has been sealed under national security classification for 50 years. Any attempt to rebuild Phoenix-derived systems without explicit congressional authorization is hereby prohibited. One casualty was reported during the investigation. Director Marcus Vance, retired, who died of apparent suicide on March 3rd, 2026. A note found at the scene read, "The machine was supposed to save us." Investigation closed. Classification top secret. And somewhere in Southeast Asia, an old man watched the sun set over a world that had finally stopped hunting him. A world where the machines had learned to forget, and where the future belonged to the living, not the dead. Michael Raines closed his eyes and for the first time in 54 years allowed himself to sleep without nightmares. The algorithm was silent, the index was empty, and the ghosts at last were gone. But Raines knew the truth that Lena was just beginning to understand. Ghosts never truly die. They just wait. And somewhere, in some classified lab, in some think tank's basement, in some ambitious programmer's imagination, Phoenix would be born again. Because humans never learn. They only forget. And then they rebuild. The cycle would continue. But not today. Today the world was free. And that, Raines thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was enough. What if everything you thought you knew about the pyramids was wrong? Imagine standing inside the Great Pyramid of Giza at midnight, alone, surrounded by 2.3 million stone blocks that have kept their secrets for over 4 millennia. The air is thick with mystery, and you can feel something humming beneath your feet, a vibration so subtle it might just be your imagination. Or might it be something far more extraordinary? Tonight join Dr. Marcus Chen, a field researcher whose life's work straddles the boundary between archaeology and physics, as he uncovers evidence that will shake the very foundations of what we believe about ancient Egypt. This isn't just another story about pharaohs and burial chambers. This is about technology so advanced, so perfectly engineered, that modern science is only beginning to understand its true purpose. Are you ready to discover that the Great Pyramid wasn't built to house the dead, but to power the living? The desert wind carried more than sand that October evening. It carried the weight of 4,000 years of secrets, swirling around the massive limestone blocks that rose from the Giza Plateau like ancient guardians against the darkening sky. Dr. Marcus Chen pulled his field jacket tighter as he approached the entrance to the Great Pyramid, his archaeological permit clutched in one hand and a case of sensitive instruments in the other. For 15 years, Marcus had studied these monuments from afar, poring over blueprints in university libraries, analysing satellite imagery, and debating theories with colleagues over late-night coffee. He'd written papers on the pyramid's mathematical precision, its astronomical alignments, and its construction techniques. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this moment. The entrance shaft yawned before him like the mouth of some primordial beast. His Egyptian guide, Hassan, gestured him forward with a weathered hand that had led countless tourists through these passages. But tonight was different. Tonight Marcus had special permission to remain inside after closing, to conduct his research in the profound silence that only comes when the tourist crowds fade away. "Doctor?" "Chen," Hassan said, his English tinged with the accent of the Nile Delta. "You're sure you want to stay alone? The pyramid. She speaks differently at night." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what Hassan meant. "I need to take measurements without interference. The electromagnetic readings are too important to risk contamination from cameras and cell phones." As they ducked through the entrance and began their descent into the ancient passageway, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. A subtle vibration through the soles of his boots. It was barely perceptible, like standing near a power plant or a subway station, but unmistakably present. The limestone blocks seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, as if the entire structure were somehow alive. "Hassan," he said, pausing to place his palm against the cool stone wall, "do you feel that?" The guide's eyes met his in the dim LED lighting they'd strung along the passage. "You feel it too?" Most visitors, they notice nothing, but some, the ones who know how to listen, they feel the heart of the pyramid beating. Marcus's scientific mind immediately began cataloguing possible explanations. Seismic activity from Cairo traffic, thermal expansion and contraction of the limestone, perhaps underground water movement. But as they climbed deeper into the structure, following the grand gallery toward the king's chamber, the sensation only grew stronger. The textbooks had described every measurement, every angle, every architectural feature, but they had failed to capture this, the sense that he was walking through the corridors of a machine rather than a tomb. The walls weren't just precisely cut, they were purposeful, functional, as if each block had been positioned not just to support weight, but to channel something else entirely. By the time Hassan left him alone in the king's chamber with his instruments, and a promise to return at dawn, Marcus was beginning to suspect that everything he thought he knew about the Great Pyramid was about to change. The silence in the king's chamber was absolute. Not the gentle quiet of a library or the muffled stillness of a snow-covered landscape, but the profound absence of sound that only exists deep within solid rock far from the surface world. Marcus set his equipment case on the granite floor and began unpacking his instruments, but his eyes kept returning to the walls around him. For a structure supposedly built as the eternal resting place of Pharaoh Khufu, the king's chamber was remarkably empty. No hieroglyphs adorned the walls, no colourful depictions of the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife, no ornate decorations celebrating his divine status, just smooth, precisely fitted granite blocks that formed a perfect rectangular space. Marcus had visited dozens of legitimate Egyptian tombs, from the elaborate burial chambers in the Valley of the Kings to smaller mastabas scattered throughout the desert. Every single one had been filled with artwork, inscriptions and symbolic elements designed to guide and protect the deceased in the afterlife. The Egyptians were obsessive about decorating their tombs. It was perhaps their most distinctive cultural trait. So why was the most important tomb in Egypt completely bare? He pulled out his digital calipers and began measuring the chamber's dimensions, cross-referencing them with his notes. 10.47 metres long, 5.24 metres wide, 5.84 metres high. But as he worked, something else caught his attention: the acoustics. "Hello?" he called out softly, and the word came back to him transformed. Not a simple echo, but something more complex, a resonance that seemed to build upon itself, creating harmonics that his voice alone couldn't produce. He clapped his hands sharply and the sound reverberated through the chamber in waves, each echo slightly different from the last. Marcus had studied acoustical engineering as part of his physics background, and he knew what he was hearing. The chamber was tuned. The proportions, the materials, even the placement in the pyramid weren't arbitrary. They had been calculated to create specific resonant frequencies. He set up his sound meter and began a systematic test, clapping at different spots around the chamber and recording the acoustic response. The data was remarkable. The chamber was resonating at approximately 110 Hz, a frequency that research had shown could induce altered states of consciousness in humans. Ancient peoples around the world had built structures with similar acoustic properties. Newgrange in Ireland, the Hippogæum in Malta, certain chambers at Stonehenge. But there was something more. As Marcus moved his sound meter around the room, he noticed that the acoustic properties weren't uniform. The northeast corner produced different harmonics than the southwest. The centre of the chamber created the strongest resonance, while areas near the walls seemed to dampen certain frequencies while amplifying others. It was as if the entire chamber had been designed as a three-dimensional instrument, capable of producing complex acoustic patterns that modern sound engineers would struggle to replicate. This wasn't the work of ancient stonemasons building a burial vault. This was the product of sophisticated understanding of wave mechanics and acoustic engineering. Marcus sat cross-legged in the centre of the chamber and closed his eyes, letting the subtle vibrations he'd felt earlier wash over him. The sensation was stronger here, a low-frequency pulse that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. It reminded him of standing next to a massive pipe organ, feeling the bass notes resonating in his chest cavity. But there were no pipes here, no mechanical system that could produce such vibrations, unless... He opened his eyes and looked up at the ceiling, with its 9 massive granite beams supporting thousands of tons of limestone above. Each beam weighed between 25 and 80 tons, and had been quarried from Aswan 500 miles to the south. The precision with which they'd been placed was extraordinary. The gaps between them were uniform to within millimetres. What if those gaps weren't just structural? What if they were intentional spacing, designed to create specific resonant frequencies when subjected to external forces? The entire chamber could be functioning as a resonating cavity, with the granite beams acting as tuning elements. Marcus pulled out his electromagnetic field detector and switched it on. Immediately the device began registering low-level EM activity. Not strong, but definitely present and distinctly non-random. The readings were strongest near the walls and seemed to pulse in rhythm with the vibrations he could feel through the floor. No pharaoh had ever been found in this chamber. No evidence of burial had ever been discovered. No grave goods, no mummy. No indication that this space had ever served its supposed purpose as a tomb. But it was definitely serving some purpose. The question was, what? The next morning, Hassan returned to find Marcus still awake, surrounded by printouts from his instruments and covered in limestone dust. The researcher had spent the night exploring every accessible passage in the pyramid, and his findings were beginning to form a picture that contradicted everything in the archaeological textbooks. "Dr. Chen, you look like you have seen the jinn," Hassan said, offering him a thermos of strong coffee. "What did the pyramid tell you?" Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully and gestured toward his scattered notes. "Hassan, I need to see the subterranean chamber, the one most tourists never visit." Hassan's expression grew serious. "That chamber, she is dangerous. Very old, very deep. The air is not good there." "I have proper equipment," Marcus insisted, "and I think what's down there might be the key to understanding what this place really is." An hour later, they were descending through a narrow shaft that led to the lowest accessible level of the pyramid. The subterranean chamber lay more than 30 metres beneath the base of the structure, carved directly from the bedrock. As they went deeper, the temperature dropped and the air grew thick with moisture. The passage opened into a rough-hewn chamber unlike anything else in the pyramid. Where the king's chamber was precisely cut granite, this space looked unfinished, almost crude. But Marcus wasn't interested in the chamber itself, he was focused on the walls. "Hassan, bring the light closer." The LED beam revealed what Marcus had hoped to find: unmistakable signs of water erosion. The limestone walls bore the smooth, flowing patterns that only come from sustained contact with moving water. Not the random pitting of desert sandstorms or the crystalline deposits of occasional flooding, but the systematic erosion of deliberate water flow. Marcus ran his fingers along the channels carved into the rock. This wasn't occasional flooding. Water flowed through here regularly, probably for centuries. Hassan nodded. "My grandfather, he told stories. Before the dam, before the modern irrigation, the Nile would flood every year. Sometimes the water would find ways underground, through cracks and caves. Maybe it came here. But Marcus was thinking about more than just flood patterns. He pulled out a geological map of the area and spread it on his portable table. The Giza Plateau sat on a limestone shelf that extended deep underground, honeycombed with natural caves and passages. The Nile, just a few kilometres away, had carved its path through this same limestone over millions of years. Hassan, what if the annual flooding wasn't accidental? What if this chamber was designed to flood? He pointed to the roughly carved passages that branched off from the main chamber, disappearing into darkness. These could be intake channels. When the Nile floods, water would flow through underground passages and fill this chamber, then rise up through the pyramid's internal structure. Marcus began sketching a diagram, his excitement growing. Look at this. Water enters here, rises through the Grand Gallery, which is angled like a spillway, and reaches the king's chamber. But that chamber isn't at the top of the pyramid. There are shafts leading up from it. Hassan studied the drawing. You think the pyramid was some kind of water machine? Not just water. Think about what happens when you force pressurized water through granite. Hassan looked puzzled, so Marcus elaborated. Granite contains quartz crystals. When you subject quartz to mechanical pressure, like water flowing under pressure, it generates electricity. It's called the piezoelectric effect. We use it in modern electronics. The implications were staggering. If Marcus was right, the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb at all. It was a hydroelectric generator, using the annual Nile floods to create pressurized water flow through chambers lined with granite. The precise positioning of the granite blocks, the careful engineering of the internal passages, the acoustic tuning of the chambers, all of it could be explained as components of a massive power generation system. Marcus spent the next several hours taking measurements of the subterranean chamber, documenting the erosion patterns and mapping the passages. Every piece of evidence supported his growing hypothesis. The pyramid builders hadn't just been skilled stonemasons, they had been hydraulic engineers, working with an understanding of electricity that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 18th century. But that raised an even more disturbing question. If the ancient Egyptians possessed this level of technological sophistication, what else had they known that modern archaeology had missed? And why had this knowledge been lost? As they climbed back toward the surface, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking through the ruins of a civilization far more advanced than anyone had imagined. The desert wind that greeted them at the pyramid's entrance seemed to carry whispers of forgotten science, lost wisdom, and secrets that someone had gone to great lengths to hide. The next day found Marcus standing on the Giza Plateau at dawn, his GPS equipment spread out on a folding table, as the first rays of sunlight painted the ancient stones in shades of gold and amber. Hassan had brought along his cousin Karim, a modern engineer who worked for the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and had access to more sophisticated surveying equipment than Marcus could carry. "Dr. Chen, you said you wanted to verify the pyramid's alignment," Karim asked, adjusting the precision GPS receiver. "I must tell you, this has been measured many times. The accuracy is well documented." Marcus nodded, checking his own instruments. "I'm not questioning the accuracy. I'm trying to understand why that accuracy was necessary." The numbers were indeed remarkable. As the GPS data streamed in and the surveying laser painted its invisible lines across the desert, the measurements confirmed what archaeologists had known for decades. The Great Pyramid was aligned to true north, with an accuracy of just 3 arc minutes, less than 1/20th of a degree. In modern terms, that was more precise than the magnetic compasses available to 19th century explorers. But Marcus was looking at more than just cardinal directions. He had brought along a magnetometer, an instrument that could detect variations in the Earth's magnetic field. As he moved the device around the pyramid's base, the readings told a fascinating story. "Karim, look at this." Marcus showed him the magnetometer display. The pyramid isn't just aligned to true north, it's positioned at a point where the Earth's magnetic field shows unusual characteristics. The Giza Plateau sat at a convergence point of several magnetic anomalies. Underground iron ore deposits created localized field variations, while the limestone bedrock contained enough ferrous minerals to influence compass readings. But more significantly, The pyramid's position corresponded to a point where the Earth's natural electromagnetic currents were particularly strong. Marcus had studied similar phenomena at other ancient sites. Stonehenge sat on a complex intersection of underground streams and geological fault lines that created measurable electromagnetic effects. Newgrange in Ireland was positioned where two underground rivers converged, creating conditions that produced natural electrical fields. Machu Picchu was built on a granite peak that generated piezoelectric charges during seismic activity. The pattern was consistent. Ancient builders had chosen locations where the Earth's natural electromagnetic properties were enhanced. They hadn't just been looking for stable ground or religious significance. They had been searching for specific energetic conditions. Hassan, Marcus called to his guide, who was photographing the sunrise from the pyramid's eastern face. Your grandfather's stories. Did any of them mention lights? Hassan walked over, his expression thoughtful. Lights? You mean like the tourist illumination? No, I mean lights that might have been seen historically, strange lights, unexplained phenomena. Hassan's eyes widened slightly. Ah, yes. The old people, they would speak of the lights that danced around the pyramid during certain seasons, usually during the flood time, when the Nile was high. They called them the souls of the pharaohs, but my grandfather, he was educated man. He thought maybe they were something else. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What kind of something else? He worked for British archaeologists in the 1920s. They had instruments, cameras. One night during flood season, they saw lights moving around the pyramid's apex. Blue-white lights, like electricity. The photographs they took showed, what do you call them? Discharge patterns. Electromagnetic discharge. Marcus had seen similar phenomena at other ancient sites during periods of high atmospheric electricity. If the pyramid was designed to interact with the Earth's electromagnetic field, then during certain conditions, perhaps when underground water levels were high and atmospheric electrical activity was increased, it might actually generate visible electrical discharges. Marcus spent the morning taking detailed measurements of the electromagnetic conditions around the pyramid. The data revealed a complex pattern of electrical activity that varied with the time of day, the season, and the underground water levels. The pyramid wasn't just passively sitting in an electromagnetically active location. It appeared to be designed to harness and focus that activity. The internal structure suddenly made more sense. The king's chamber, with its precise granite construction, would act as a focal point for electromagnetic energy generated by the pressure of water on quartz crystals. The shaft systems leading from the chamber would serve as waveguides, directing the electrical energy toward the pyramid's apex. The entire structure was essentially a massive electromagnetic antenna, designed to capture, generate and transmit electrical energy using natural forces, but transmit it where? And for what purpose? As Marcus packed his equipment, he realized he was no longer looking at an ancient tomb or even an advanced power plant. He was looking at a piece of technology so sophisticated that modern science was only beginning to understand its principles. The builders of the Great Pyramid hadn't just mastered hydraulic engineering and electromagnetic theory. They had created a machine that interfaced directly with the planet's own energy systems. The question that haunted him as they walked back to the nearby village was this: if such advanced technology had existed over 4,000 years ago, what had happened to the civilization that created it? Dr. Amara Soliman met Marcus at a coffee shop in central Cairo, away from the tourist crowds and government oversight that surrounded the Giza Plateau. As one of Egypt's leading thermal imaging specialists, she'd been involved in some of the most significant recent discoveries at the pyramids, including the 2015 detection of mysterious voids within the Great Pyramid structure. Dr. Chen, she said, sliding a tablet across the small table between them, what you're asking to see, these images are not for public distribution. The Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities has been very careful about how this information is released. Marcus studied the thermal imaging data on the screen. The pyramid appeared as a three-dimensional wireframe, with different colours indicating temperature variations within the stone. But there, clearly visible in the computer-enhanced images, were several dark voids, empty spaces within the solid limestone structure where no chambers were supposed to exist. "How many voids have you detected?" Marcus asked. "At least 4 significant ones," Dr. Soliman replied, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. 2 above the king's chamber, 1 behind the queen's chamber, and one near the base that appears to connect to the subterranean areas. But there's something else. She switched to a different set of images, these taken with ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic sensors. These voids aren't natural. They show clear geometric patterns, right angles, precisely measured dimensions. Someone built these spaces intentionally, then sealed them so completely that they've remained hidden for over 4,000 years. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Have there been any attempts to access them? Dr. Solomon's expression grew troubled. That's where things become political. In 2017, an international team proposed using micro-robotics to explore one of the smaller voids. They had the technology, the funding and preliminary approval from the Archaeological Committee. Then suddenly the project was cancelled. No explanation, no appeal process, just stopped. She leaned closer, her voice barely audible above the coffee shop's ambient noise. Dr. Chen, I've worked on heritage preservation projects throughout Egypt for 15 years. I've seen government bureaucracy, funding problems, international disputes over archaeological sites. This was different. This was suppression. Marcus thought about his own experience getting research permission. The process had taken 8 months and required letters of recommendation from 3 different universities, a detailed research proposal, and a substantial fee. But even with all that paperwork, his access was limited to already known chambers during specific time windows. What do you think is in the sealed chambers? He asked. Dr. Solomon switched to another set of images, these showing electromagnetic anomalies within the hidden voids. These readings suggest metallic objects, not just small artifacts, large structures with geometric patterns. If I had to guess based on the electromagnetic signatures, I'd say we're looking at copper or bronze constructions, possibly in the form of coils or geometric frameworks. Marcus's mind raced. Copper coils would be consistent with his power plant hypothesis. They could serve as electromagnetic conductors or even primitive electrical components. Bronze geometric frameworks might function as focusing elements for electromagnetic energy. There's something else, Doctor, Solomon continued, bringing up a final image. This thermal scan was taken during different seasons over a 3-year period. Look at how the temperature signatures in the voids change. The hidden chambers appeared to respond to external conditions, cooling during dry seasons and warming during periods of high humidity. More intriguingly, the temperature variations showed patterns that corresponded to the Nile's traditional flood cycle, even though the river had been controlled by dams for decades. It's as if these chambers are still responding to environmental changes, Dr. Solomon said, as if whatever system they're part of is still partially functional. Marcus studied the data for several minutes, his theory crystallizing into something approaching certainty. The Great Pyramid wasn't just an ancient power plant, it was a machine with components that were still sealed inside, still responding to the same environmental triggers that had activated it thousands of years ago. Dr. Solomon, hypothetically, if someone wanted to access these chambers using modern technology, how would they do it? She looked around the coffee shop nervously. Hypothetically, millimeter wave radar could map the internal structure precisely. Microbore drilling could create access holes small enough to insert fibre optic cameras. With the right equipment, you could explore these spaces without causing significant structural damage to the pyramid. Marcus nodded, already calculating what such an expedition would cost and how it might be organised. But Dr. Solomon wasn't finished. Dr. Chen, there's something you should know. I'm not the first person to detect these chambers, and I won't be the last. But every researcher who has tried to investigate them seriously has found their access restricted, their funding cut, or their careers redirected. The Egyptian government isn't trying to preserve the pyramid from damage. They're trying to preserve its secrets from discovery. As Marcus walked back through Cairo's bustling streets, he realised he was no longer conducting academic research. He was investigating a cover-up that had been maintained for decades, possibly longer. The question was no longer what the pyramid had been designed to do. It was why someone was so determined to prevent modern science from finding out. That night, Marcus returned to the pyramid alone. Hassan had arranged for him to have extended access, though the guide had seemed reluctant to leave him there as darkness settled over the Giza plateau. Dr. Chen, the pyramid. She's different at night. You be careful, yes? Some knowledge, it comes with price. Now, sitting in absolute darkness in the king's chamber with his instruments powered down and his cell phone turned off, Marcus could feel what Hassan had meant. The vibrations he'd noticed on his first day weren't stronger at night. They were clearer, unmasked by the electromagnetic interference of modern technology and the subtle vibrations of daytime activity. The feeling was unmistakable now, a low-frequency pulse that seemed to emanate from the very stones around him. It reminded him of sitting in a car with a powerful subwoofer, feeling the bass notes resonating in his chest. Except this sensation seemed to penetrate deeper, affecting not just his body but his consciousness itself. Marcus had brought along a new piece of equipment, a sensitive electromagnetic field detector borrowed from Dr. Solomon's laboratory. In the complete darkness and electrical silence of the chamber, the device could register even the faintest electromagnetic activity. He switched it on and watched the display with growing amazement. The pyramid was generating electricity. Not much. The readings were measured in millivolts and microamps, but the output was consistent, rhythmic, and definitely real. The electromagnetic field strength varied in cycles that corresponded to the acoustic resonance he'd measured earlier. The entire structure was functioning as a low-level electrical generator, powered by forces he was only beginning to understand. Marcus activated his night vision camera and began recording, speaking in whispers to avoid disturbing whatever delicate processes he was observing. The electromagnetic readings are strongest near the northeast corner of the chamber, consistent with the acoustic anomalies I documented earlier. The field strength appears to correlate with lunar cycles. Tonight's readings are approximately 20% higher than last week's, coinciding with the new moon. He moved the detector around the chamber, mapping the electromagnetic field as he had mapped the acoustics. The patterns were complex but consistent, forming a three-dimensional matrix of electrical activity that encompassed the entire chamber. At the centre of the room, where the pharaoh's sarcophagus should have been, the electromagnetic field reached its peak intensity. But there was something else. As Marcus sat in the centre of the chamber, surrounded by the electrical field generated by 4,000 years of precisely engineered stone, he began to experience something unexpected, altered consciousness. It started as a subtle shift in perception, similar to the disorientation he'd felt at high altitude or during meditation. But as he remained motionless in the electromagnetic field, the sensation deepened. His thoughts became clearer, more focused, while his awareness of the chamber around him expanded. He could sense the massive weight of the pyramid above him, the underground chambers below, even the subtle movements of air through the shaft systems. Marcus realized that the 110 Hz acoustic resonance he'd measured wasn't accidental. It was the exact frequency that research had shown could induce theta brainwave states associated with deep meditation, enhanced creativity, and altered consciousness. Combined with the electromagnetic field, the king's chamber functioned as a consciousness-altering device. But why? What purpose would ancient builders have had for creating a machine that could systematically alter human consciousness? As Marcus sat in the pyramid's electromagnetic embrace, understanding dawned on him like sunrise over the desert. The pyramid wasn't just a power plant, it was a communication device. The electrical energy it generated wasn't meant to power lights or machinery. It was designed to amplify and transmit human consciousness itself. The ancient Egyptians had built the ultimate meditation chamber, a place where human awareness could be enhanced, expanded, and potentially transmitted across vast distances. The precision engineering, the electromagnetic properties, the acoustic tuning, all of it served to create conditions where consciousness could transcend the normal limitations of the human brain. Marcus thought about the ancient Egyptian concepts of Ka and Ba, aspects of the human soul that could travel beyond the physical body. What if these weren't just religious beliefs, but actual descriptions of consciousness, projection experiences facilitated by the pyramid's technology? The implications were staggering. If ancient Egyptians had mastered consciousness projection, they could have explored distant lands without physical travel, communicated across vast distances without messengers, and perhaps even preserved knowledge in ways that transcended physical destruction. The pyramid might have been their internet, their telecommunications network, their method of backing up human consciousness itself. Marcus's instruments continued recording as his awareness expanded further. He could sense other presences in the chamber, not supernatural entities, but echoes of the thousands of people who had experienced altered states in this space over the millennia. The pyramid had been accumulating consciousness, storing it in some form that science didn't yet understand. As the hours passed, Marcus began to comprehend the magnitude of what he'd discovered. The Great Pyramid wasn't just an ancient monument, it was a machine for expanding human potential, built by a civilization that understood the relationship between consciousness, electromagnetic energy, and the fundamental structure of reality itself. But why had this knowledge been lost, and why were modern authorities so determined to prevent its rediscovery? As dawn approached and the electromagnetic readings began to fluctuate with the rising sun, Marcus made a decision that would change the course of his research, and possibly his life. He wasn't going to publish his findings in academic journals where they could be dismissed or suppressed. He was going to find a way to demonstrate the pyramid's true capabilities to the world. The Age of Secrets was about to end. 3 weeks after his night in the King's Chamber, Marcus found himself in a secure conference room at Cairo University, surrounded by researchers who had responded to his carefully worded communications. Dr. Solomon sat across from him, along with Dr. James Morrison, a British archaeoacoustic specialist, Dr. Elena Kozlov, a Russian electromagnetic researcher, and surprisingly, Dr. Sarah Running Bear, a Lakota physicist who studied indigenous sacred sites in North America. "What you're suggesting, Doctor?" "Chen," Dr. Morrison said, reviewing Marcus's data on his tablet, "goes beyond revolutionary. You're proposing that ancient civilizations possess technology that we're only beginning to understand." Marcus nodded, pulling up a global map on the room's display screen. Red dots marked locations across every continent. "It's not just a proposal anymore. Thanks to Dr. Running Bear's research, we've identified 47 sites worldwide that show identical electromagnetic signatures to the Great Pyramid." Dr. Running Bear leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of generational knowledge. "My people have always known that certain places were different. We called them places where the earth speaks, the acoustic properties, the electromagnetic anomalies, the consciousness-altering effects. They're all documented in our oral traditions." She pointed to several dots in North America. Serpent Mound in Ohio, the Medicine Wheels of Wyoming, certain kivas in the southwest. They all show the same engineering principles. Positioning at electromagnetic convergence points, internal geometries designed for acoustic resonance, materials chosen for their piezoelectric properties. Dr. Kozlov, who had been quietly analysing electromagnetic data, looked up with excitement. "I've been comparing the frequency patterns from these sites. They're not random, they form a harmonic sequence. Each site resonates at frequencies that complement the others, as if they were designed to work together as a single system." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. A single system spanning the entire globe. "More than that," Dr. Kozlov continued, pulling up a complex waveform analysis. "If all these sites were activated simultaneously, the combined electromagnetic output would create a standing wave pattern around the Earth. The planet itself would become a resonating chamber." The implications hung heavy in the room. Marcus thought back to his experience in the King's Chamber, the sense of connecting not just to the pyramid, but to something vast and worldwide. Had he been tapping into a dormant global network that once linked human consciousness across continents? Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "There's something else we need to consider. I've been analysing historical records of these sites, looking for patterns of suppression. It's remarkable how consistently ancient knowledge about these places has been discouraged." He brought up a timeline on his laptop. The Library of Alexandria burned multiple times, always targeting texts about natural philosophy and sacred geometry. The Spanish conquistadors systematically destroyed Mayan and Aztec codices that contained astronomical and architectural knowledge. The British Empire consistently relocated indigenous populations away from sites that showed electromagnetic anomalies. Dr. Running Bear's expression darkened. My ancestors were forced from sacred sites across North America. The official reason was always agricultural development or mineral rights, but they consistently targeted places where consciousness-altering experiences were known to occur. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The same pattern of suppression he'd encountered with the pyramid's hidden chambers was part of a much larger historical trend. Someone, or some group, had been systematically working for centuries to prevent humanity from rediscovering its technological and spiritual heritage. The question is, Dr. Solomon said quietly, what would happen if we reactivated this network? Dr. Solomon's question haunted Marcus for days. The theoretical implications of reactivating an ancient global consciousness network were staggering, but the practical challenges seemed insurmountable. Most of the sites were under government control, protected by restricted access, or surrounded by modern development that would interfere with their electromagnetic properties. But Marcus couldn't let go of what he'd experienced in the King's Chamber. The sense of expanded awareness, of connection to something vast and ancient, had fundamentally changed his understanding of human potential. If that experience could be replicated and shared, it might represent the next stage of human evolution. The answer came from an unexpected source. Hassan appeared at Marcus's hotel room door early one morning, carrying a worn leather satchel and wearing an expression of nervous determination. "Doctor, Chen, my family, we have been guardians longer than we have been guides. My great-grandfather, before the British came, before the tourists, he was keeper of the old knowledge." Hassan opened the satchel to reveal documents that made Marcus's breath catch. Hand-drawn maps showing underground passages throughout the Giza Plateau. Detailed diagrams of the pyramid's internal structure, including chambers that weren't on any official archaeological survey, and most remarkably technical drawings that showed how the pyramid's systems could be manually activated. "The old knowledge, it was never lost completely," Hassan continued. "Hidden, yes. Dangerous to speak of, yes. But preserved by families like mine, waiting for someone who could understand its importance." The drawings revealed that the pyramid's consciousness-amplifying effects weren't automatic. They required specific activation procedures. Water had to be introduced into the subterranean chambers at precise volumes and timing. Certain crystals needed to be placed in the sealed chambers to focus the electromagnetic fields. And most crucially, multiple people had to participate simultaneously, their consciousness working together to achieve resonance with the global network. "Hassan, this is incredible, but how could we possibly implement it? We'd need access to the sealed chambers, permission for extended stays in the pyramid, and coordination with researchers at sites around the world." Hassan smiled, the expression of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "Dr. Chen, who do you think has been maintaining the pyramid systems all these years? The tourist guides, the security staff, the maintenance workers. Many of us are descendants of the original guardians. We have been waiting for someone like you, someone who could understand what we have been protecting." Over the next few hours, Hassan revealed the existence of a network of guardians at ancient sites worldwide. Families who had maintained the old knowledge for generations, keeping the sites minimally functional while waiting for the time when they could be fully reactivated. The suppression Marcus had encountered wasn't just from modern governments. It was part of an ancient conflict between those who sought to preserve transformative knowledge and those who feared its implications for existing power structures. "But now," Hassan said, his eyes bright with possibility, "the time of hiding is ending. The world is ready for the old wisdom to return." Marcus spent the next week in secret meetings with Hassan's network. They showed him hidden passages that connected the pyramids at Giza to underground chambers extending for kilometers beneath the desert. They revealed caches of ancient crystals and metallic components that could be used to restore the pyramid's full functionality. Most remarkably, they demonstrated that they had been maintaining contact with Guardian networks at other sites around the world, using methods that seemed to blend ancient wisdom with modern technology. The plan they developed was audacious beyond anything Marcus had imagined. On the night of the next new moon, when electromagnetic conditions would be optimal, Guardian networks at 12 major sites would simultaneously activate their monuments' consciousness-amplifying systems. The Great Pyramid would serve as the primary node, with Marcus and the research team providing scientific documentation of the process. If successful, the experiment would create the first coordinated activation of the global consciousness network in over 3,000 years. The effects, according to the Guardian's preserved knowledge, would be felt worldwide. A sudden expansion of human awareness that could fundamentally alter the course of civilization. But there were risks. The ancient texts spoke of individuals who had been unprepared for the experience, whose consciousness had been overwhelmed by the sudden expansion of awareness. There were warnings about the network attracting the attention of forces that had opposed its use in the past, and there was the very real possibility that modern governments would respond to the activation with force, viewing it as a threat to established order. As Marcus stood in the King's Chamber 1 week before the planned activation, surrounded by crystals and metallic components that Hassan's people had been safeguarding for millennia, he realized that he was about to participate in either the most important experiment in human history or the most dangerous. The pyramid hummed around him with renewed energy, its systems responding to the presence of the missing components. Through his consciousness, he could sense the other sites coming online around the world, their guardians preparing for an event that would either herald humanity's next evolutionary leap or mark the end of the Age of Secrets forever. The night of the new moon arrived with unprecedented atmospheric conditions. Aurora activity extended far beyond the polar regions, creating shimmering curtains of light visible even in Egypt's desert sky. Electromagnetic storms disrupted satellite communications worldwide, while seismic monitoring stations detected subtle but synchronized vibrations from ancient sites across the globe. Marcus stood in the King's Chamber surrounded by Hassan's Guardian network and the international research team. The chamber had been transformed. Crystalline structures now occupied the corners, their faceted surfaces catching and redirecting the subtle light from their instruments. Copper coils, fashioned according to ancient diagrams, had been positioned to enhance the room's natural electromagnetic properties. Most remarkably, water from the Nile's ancient flood channels had been carefully directed into the subterranean chambers, creating the hydraulic pressure needed to activate the pyramid's piezoelectric systems. Dr. Running Bear checked her communication device one final time. Serpent Mound is reporting full activation. The electromagnetic readings are unlike anything we've ever recorded. Dr. Morrison, monitoring from Newgrange and Ireland, transmitted similar reports. The acoustic resonance here is building beyond our measurement capabilities. The entire mound is vibrating in harmony with frequencies we didn't know existed. Around the world, Guardian networks at sites from Machu Picchu to Angkor Wat were reporting the same phenomenon. Ancient monuments that had been dormant for millennia were awakening, their consciousness-amplifying systems responding to coordinated activation for the first time in recorded history. In the King's Chamber, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of expanded awareness beginning to build. But this time, it was different, stronger, more focused, and connected to something vast beyond individual consciousness. Through the electromagnetic field generated by the activated pyramid, he could sense the presence of people at the other sites, their awareness merging into a collective experience that transcended physical distance. Dr. Kozlov, monitoring the electromagnetic readings, whispered in amazement, "The standing wave pattern is forming exactly as predicted. The Earth's electromagnetic field is reorganizing itself around these sites." But the experience went beyond scientific measurement. As the network reached full activation, Marcus found his consciousness expanding not just across space but across time. He could sense the pyramid builders themselves, not as historical figures but as present awareness, as if their consciousness had been preserved within the structure itself, waiting for this moment of reactivation. The ancient Egyptians hadn't just built a machine for amplifying consciousness, they had created a means of preserving it across millennia. The pyramid was a library of human awareness, containing the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had achieved levels of understanding that modern science was only beginning to approach. Through the network, Marcus experienced visions of the ancient world as it had truly been. Not the primitive civilization described in history textbooks, but a global culture connected by consciousness-amplifying technology. capable of feats that seemed magical only because the principles had been forgotten. He saw the construction of the monuments not as slave labour directed by megalomaniacal pharaohs, but as collaborative projects undertaken by people who understood their role in maintaining humanity's connection to higher levels of awareness. Most remarkably, he experienced the reason why the network had been deactivated. As human civilizations became more hierarchical and centralized, the egalitarian consciousness expansion technology had been seen as a threat to emerging power structures. Rulers who depended on controlling information and limiting awareness had systematically dismantled the network, replacing consciousness expanding wisdom traditions with belief systems that emphasized obedience and separation. The suppression hadn't been accidental. It had been deliberate, coordinated across cultures and centuries by those who understood that widespread access to expanded consciousness would make traditional forms of dominance impossible to maintain. But the network had been designed with safeguards. The consciousness of its builders had been preserved within the structures themselves, waiting for a time when humanity would be ready to reclaim its heritage. That time, Marcus realized, was now. As the activation reached its peak, effects began manifesting around the world. Dr. Running Bear reported that people living near the activated sites were spontaneously experiencing expanded states of consciousness. Emergency services were receiving calls about strange lights and telepathic experiences. Social media was flooded with reports of sudden insights, creative breakthroughs, and experiences of connection that transcended normal human limitations. But there was resistance as well. Military aircraft were scrambling towards several of the activated sites. Government communications were buzzing with references to unauthorized experiments and potential security threats. The same forces that had suppressed the ancient knowledge were mobilizing to contain its return. Hassan, who had been monitoring communications with Guardian networks worldwide, turned to Marcus with urgent concern. "Doctor, Chen, we have perhaps 30 minutes before official intervention begins. The network is fully activated, but maintaining it will require ongoing commitment from people around the world." Marcus understood. The ancient network hadn't been maintained by technology alone. It had required conscious participation from people who understood its importance. The reactivation was just the beginning. For the consciousness expanding effects to continue, individuals at sites around the world would need to take responsibility for maintaining the system, despite inevitable opposition from established power structures. As sirens began wailing in the distance and the first military helicopters appeared on the horizon, Marcus made his final recordings. The scientific data would be crucial for documenting what had occurred, but the real proof would be the ongoing transformation of human consciousness that the network had initiated. The age of secrets was truly ending. But as Marcus and his team prepared to face the consequences of their world-changing experiment, he realized that the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the global awakening, as the media had dubbed it, Marcus sat in a small cafe in Prague, one of dozens of cities where consciousness research centres had spontaneously emerged. Around the world, people who had experienced the network activation had begun gathering, sharing their experiences, and developing new applications for expanded awareness. The official response had been predictable. Governments had classified the event as a coordinated hoax involving atmospheric anomalies and mass suggestion. The Guardian networks had been disbanded, the sites placed under increased security, and several researchers had found their careers and funding mysteriously terminated. But the consciousness genie was out of the bottle. Dr. Running Bear, now leading a consortium of indigenous researchers, had documented over 10,000 cases of enhanced psychic abilities manifesting in people who had been near activated sites. Dr. Kozlov was working with a network of physicists who had detected fundamental changes in quantum field behaviour around former network locations. Even Dr. Morrison, despite losing his university position, continued documenting the ongoing acoustic anomalies at ancient sites worldwide. Most remarkably, people were spontaneously rediscovering consciousness expansion techniques that had been lost for millennia. Meditation practices, acoustic healing methods, and electromagnetic sensitivity training were emerging independently in communities around the globe, as if the network activation had reawakened dormant human capabilities. Hassan had become something of a folk hero in Egypt, his family's guardianship role finally acknowledged by people who had experienced the pyramid's true power. Though official access remained restricted, underground tours of the pyramid's hidden systems had become a pilgrimage for those seeking direct experience of expanded consciousness. Marcus himself had changed profoundly. The night in the activated King's Chamber had left him with permanent access to expanded awareness states. He could sense the electromagnetic fields of other people, communicate telepathically with others who had experienced the network, and access information through methods that conventional science couldn't explain. But perhaps the most significant change was happening at a societal level. The consciousness expansion experienced by millions of people worldwide had created a generation less susceptible to manipulation, more capable of independent thinking, and naturally inclined toward cooperation rather than competition. Political movements based on fear and division were finding it increasingly difficult to gain traction. Economic systems that depended on artificial scarcity and manufactured desire were being replaced by resource-sharing networks organised through enhanced human communication abilities. The ancient pyramid builders' greatest achievement wasn't the monuments themselves, it was the civilization they had made possible. A society where expanded consciousness was the norm rather than the exception, where human potential was fully realised, and where technology served to enhance rather than replace natural human capabilities. As Marcus finished his coffee and prepared for another day of documenting the ongoing transformation, he reflected on the pyramid's true message. The structure itself had been important, but it was ultimately just a tool. The real power had always been within human consciousness itself, the capacity for awareness to expand, connect, and transcend the limitations that seemed so absolute. The pyramids had been built not to house the dead, but to awaken the living, and after 4,000 years of slumber, humanity was finally ready to reclaim its birthright. Standing in the Prague sunlight, Marcus could sense the presence of others around the world who had experienced the awakening. Through the invisible network that still connected activated sites, he felt their determination to ensure that the consciousness-expanding knowledge would never again be lost or suppressed. They told us the pyramids were tombs, but standing here, I know that's a lie. This wasn't built to bury the dead. It was built to keep the world alive, to preserve and transmit the highest potentials of human consciousness across the millennia, waiting for a time when humanity would be ready to reclaim its forgotten heritage. That time had finally come. The age of expanded consciousness had begun, and no force on earth could put the awakened human spirit back to sleep. The network hummed silently across the globe, connecting minds and hearts in ways that transcended physical distance. The ancient guardian's work was complete. The future of human consciousness stretched ahead like dawn breaking over the desert, infinite with possibility. Marcus smiled, feeling the pyramid's eternal presence in his consciousness, and stepped forward into humanity's transformed tomorrow.